Okay, welcome. And for my fellow North American viewers, good morning. For everyone who's watching from Europe, good afternoon, almost good evening to us. My name is Hellqvist. I am the Managing Director of Copperberg, and I will also be your host and moderator for this afternoon. What we have in front of us today is a couple of hours filled with some really interesting content around the topic of field service. And I was just sitting here in the waiting room with my speakers, but speakers who would take the virtual stage today, discussing on how this has become more and more important, especially during the pandemic. One thing that we see is, of course, the adoption of the digital tools that are at hand, as well as how the maturity levels, both at the customers, but as well within our own organizations, and how we use it, how we leverage it, and how we have re-educated ourselves and the market, maybe as an effect of the pandemic, has become extremely important. Throughout today, you will be able to post questions. Just use the chat whenever possible. And this is where I will bring them up to the speakers that are here with us today. We also have a few speakers that couldn't join us live, but has, of course, pre-recorded dedicated sessions that are tailored for this specific live stream. Of course, all of these sessions will also be recorded, so you can watch them on demand afterwards, should you wish to. Another note is, of course, that if you find any technical issues, you are allowed to drop me a DM, and I will, of course, look into that with my team here on the back-end side and try to fix it as we go along. We will start with the session from Stephen Hodson, who is the Senior Director of Services at Thermo Fisher Scientific, and he will walk us through transformational service business models. And this is a session that we pre-recorded together, Stephen and I, and that I will be showing to you in a few seconds. After that, we will be joined by Ali, who is the Vice President of Client Success and Operations at ProntoForms. He will walk us through how the future is here now, and actually how we can start our digital transformation today in order to have a more optimized and efficient field service operations further down the line. Then we follow up that presentation with a discussion between Aric from Flowserve. He's the VP Marketing, Technology and Engineering, and Kevin Foster, who is the VP of IoT Marketing at PTC. And here we will learn how Flowserve, through different connected products, have been able to better predict, act, and protect their customers and provide a better service offering. Then we are following this up with Sydney Lara from Aquant and Jason Smith, who is the Field Service Director EMEA at 3D Systems, where we will look at how you best adapt your service to meet your customer demands. And this session was also pre-recorded because of Jason's busy schedule, but Sydney will then later on be joining us in the panel that will conclude this event today. The panel will be between myself, Kevin, Ali, Aric, and Sydney, and this is the sort of finishing touches of this live stream. And as I said, feel free to post questions in the Q&A as we go along. And again, if you have any questions, issues, or anything like that, you drop me a direct message and my team and I will look into it. I hope you enjoy the next couple of hours, and I will start now with sharing my screen and, of course, let you enjoy Stephen's session.
Today, I'd like to discuss with you developing service transformational business models and roadmaps, really, for businesses and customers today and for the rapidly changing and increasingly digital service world of the future. My name is Stephen Hodson. I work with Thermo Fisher and I head up global services in one of our businesses. And Thermo Fisher is the world leader in serving science. So discussing service transformation today, part of the journey, I believe, in my experience, is what is the vision of the future? What is the service business that we have today? And where do we see ourselves in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 10 years from today? Many field service businesses, or typically all service businesses, start really in a product related, product quality, product revenue type component, which is here in the bottom left hand side of the journey, if you will. Really basic warranty services provided with the products which we sell, and then service when warranty is needed and failure. Secondly, there's the time and material we're all familiar with, which is both time and labor and spare parts, and then preventive maintenance type services. So these are the first three components or building blocks, if you will, of product related services. And then we get to full service contracts, which really then start reducing our customers' risk and giving them a fixed total cost of ownership and some reducing their risk at this level. There's an opportunity in the future. Today, approximately 60% of field service organizations or service organizations are operating in this lower quadrant here, really selling full service contracts, preventive maintenance, time, material, and warranty. But there's another 40% who aspire to capturing more value from services, becoming more intimate with customers, increasing barriers to exit, and creating more profitable, higher value added services in the customer's ecosystem. So that's what we're talking about really on this one slide, is that journey, how to go from a product related service to a customer related value added service organization. Part of the journey as well is really around this reactive corner. So this the service contracts, these elements are really highly reactive, very service engineer geared. So the more service interventions, the more contracts that are sold, the more field service engineers you need to add to your service organization, and the more spare parts you need to use. As we start going more into services as a product and not products as a service, we then gain more value. And we can start doing this really through preventive services, predictive services, and proactive services, which bring a lot of value to our customers. The next step beyond service contracts really is predictive services. And then we go into process optimization. So this is improving efficiencies, improving compliance for us as a vendor. And this really is giving outcome-based services for our customers. So often they'll be charging for service based on outcomes and not on a fixed service contract. And then beyond this, as a service provider, there's business optimization processes, which is around providing everything as a service. And this helps us increase competitive advantage. And then beyond that, even there's business transformational. So this is when we start as service organizations implementing strategic change for our customers and helping and supporting them with that part of their business. And this can involve managed services. So I've been involved in laboratories in countries where we provided, above and beyond field service, we provided integrated services for the whole laboratory. So that means we coordinated all the different vendors, all the different services, suppliers, service contracts, consumables, etc., that the customers would need, and then they came just to one vendor. They didn't need to deal with 5, 6, 10, 20 different service providers and consumable providers. It was a one-stop shop, so it's much more cost efficient, more effective, and there were other benefits as well for the laboratory, reducing their risk and controlling their budget. So managed services is a much higher value added business than our traditional service in the lower quadrant here. And then beyond that really is becoming part of the customer's service value chain all the way through end to end, improving the value for the customer, the end to end in their experience and their interaction with our companies, with the services we provide, and with the overall experience. And then we have a true unique value proposition. What does this mean for our customers? They view us really here when we play in this corner, in this quadrant, they view us here just as a vendor. We fix problems for them. When they buy contracts from us, we become a preferred supplier. And then we start providing predictive service and full service contracts, then we become solution providers. So we assure uptime, availability, operational effectiveness, and we become a solution provider. Beyond this, when we start working with them and optimizing their processes and helping them with their business overall, we become a true advisor, a trusted advisor and a partner for their business. We improve their processes in terms of turnaround time, in terms of budgeting and planning, uptime, and overall equipment effectiveness, and helping them with their overall business model. And then beyond this, we can become truly strategic business partners, helping them transform their business by providing things like managed service contracts, outsourcing. They can outsource to us some of the services that they need to provide, and we can help support them. And then beyond that, we can really become integrated into their value chain. So providing software as a service, for example, providing managed services, solutions, resident engineers in many cases. So we physically embed our engineers into the facilities. Engineers have their own offices. They almost become employees together, working shoulder to shoulder with our customers. And then we truly become part of their ecosystem. Very fast response time. We monitor the uptime. We manage the service metrics. So hugely valuable here. And then ultimately, again, here, we've got a great value proposition. We're part of the customer's ecosystem, and we have a true unique relationship with us, making us very sticky, intimate, difficult to leave. And yeah, very high customer advocacy score, customer NPS scores at this level of the interaction. So my question to you, when looking at service transformation, is what is your vision for the future? Where do we want to get to? Where are we today? Where do you see yourself on this continuum? What's your level of maturity? And then what's the ambition looking out 10 years from now, 2030? Where do you want to be? How do you see your service organization? And that, to a large extent, will define your transformation and the model and the approach that we'd use to transform from a product-related service provider to a true business-related partner and a trusted advisor for the customer. So here we go, really from product to relationship service providers. So how do we do that? I've had in my 30 years experience in service, customer service, field service, customer support centers, the transformation journey really comprises of 7 steps. The first one is really around assessing service performance and maturity. So there's different models we can use. There's different vendors online to do this, complete surveys, or you can work with consultants to do that, or we can use our own internal business development teams, which I've done successfully many times. So assessing performance and maturity. Where are we today? What is the level of service provided in the organization? And what's the maturity? Where are we on that curve today? And then defining the business case, agreeing with the stakeholders on the scope of the improvement potential, and identifying the business priorities and challenges to implement. This is key because we need to build a business case for the transformation. This will involve investment. So we have to develop a business case that we can present to the executives, to the C-suite, to get the funding we need and to demonstrate a return on investment, be that productivity, efficiency, service sales, customer satisfaction. That needs to be quantified to develop that business case before we can go much further above and beyond that. Then they define the why. The why change with all the stakeholders, the call to action. What's the imperative to change? What's the need to change? And what will drive that with all the stakeholders? So different stakeholders will have different reasons and needs and imperatives. And this could be a fracture in the business. This could be a new competitor. It could be an acquisition. It could be COVID. Maybe COVID-19 has brought challenges to our business and we need to change and we have to change. But this is critical. Why change with the stakeholders to map that out and to help us drive the transformation. And then, of course, the vision and strategy of the service business for the future. Hugely important There's no plug or play or blueprint in developing this, but so some very important things to consider when developing the strategy and really aligning as a service business where you want to be in the future. It's hugely important that the vision is realistic. Think big by all means, but then it has to be balanced to be very pragmatic and practical, and it's got to be for the long term. So I've had experience with visions and strategies that are sort of 1 or 2 years out, and they didn't look much further behind that. And so the implementation, the drive, the returns, they just weren't there because we didn't take a long-term view of it at the time. It was too short-term. So hugely important. And they will evolve over time as well. They're not set in stone, the vision and the strategy of the future service business. So that should evolve with time as the competitive and the environment changes over time. And then design the service operating model to implement that vision. What will the organizational design look like? What will the IT tools look like? What will the systems, the processes, the people, the staffing, the resourcing? What is the business model? What's the go-to market service model that we'll be implementing? How to design that to achieve that vision and that mission? And then, of course, piloting, using an agile approach and a nimble approach to pilot and build and test the service operating model, and then getting to the delivering results phase. Training is hugely important with service organizations, and change management to take the whole field service team and the organization, the managers, the frontline service, the contact centers, the back office, sales, marketing, finance, all the stakeholders need to be managed through a change management program to ensure a successful implementation of a service transformation program. Then lastly, it needs to be supported and maintained. It needs the sustainability, the governance to drive it, and really to leverage the success. We've implemented service management systems, IT systems to transform the business, but then when they're implemented, they weren't optimized afterwards. So they were basically frozen in the implementation stage, and then they weren't optimized, adapted, amended, and updated really to leverage the power of the new systems we had. So after 2 or 3 years, we found we had to do a total redesign of the system to get the benefits that we'd originally designed from, because we weren't adapting and adopting them as we went. It's hugely important, lastly, to create alignment across management teams on how the service business should operate, particularly in a geographic transformation. If it's global across different continents, US is very different than Japan, than Asia Pac, China, Europe. Typically, US is one of the larger markets for organizations, and it's one language, it's one country, it's one currency. Big organizations, big structures, very mature. So often they have established their own organization, their own processes, and it's very difficult to, in my experience, change and bring the US with you on the transformation journey. And lastly, it's all about people. So services is all about people. So we need to change behavior in the transformation and understand, take the people with us, tell them, why the transformation, involve them in the changes, in the design, in the process from the beginning, because people are hugely important. And in many cases, the service transformation will involve cultural change as well. So it's all about people. I'm passionate about service people in our business, because they're really the customers and our people in service. That's what we're working with. So ensure they're taken with. Talking about service transformation, we've used pictograms before in a couple of the changes in which I've been involved in, which I found hugely helpful. This is very busy, so I can't take you through the whole thing, but we had 2 types of customers in the clinical market and in the industry. This was in a previous company I worked with. So we had 2 different markets, and then they had different, we had different customer segments within those markets with different needs. And then here we have the stage, which is where we deliver our services frontline. This is the application specialists, the customer portal, the sales team, multifunctional teams supporting the customer, and of course field service on stage, all enabled with remote service and things like augmented reality, and then measuring customer experience. So in everything we do around service transformation, you know, the customer should be at the center and needs to be at the center of the design. So measuring customer experience before, during, after, and then having an intentional design of customer experience. It doesn't happen by chance. We have to design the customer experience, and part of the transformation is how do we improve the customer experience and the customer journey so that we increase net promoter score or customer allegiance scores. And these are the various elements in this service transformation we implemented with customer experience centers, follow the sun support centers, Internet of Things, enabled remote monitoring, connecting with our support centers, with customers, and with service. And then, of course, back office, we have the field service supply chain. We have our forecasting, global spare parts forecasting, and reverse logistics. So returning instruments back through reverse for depot repair. And then customer experience management. Again, monitoring the customer experience and managing it intentionally by design, not by chance. And then different inputs, how to develop a high efficiency service delivery model, designing, measuring, and managing the customer experience, the service sales strategy, how do we do that? What's the go-to-market model? Driving proactive knowledge management systems, and then standards, KPIs, dashboards, scorecards. And then service portfolio management is key. And of course, serviceability and product design, looking further out, ensuring our products are designed for serviceability. So when you think about service transformation, you know, I would encourage you to either pictorially or in working groups is to map out, you know, from the vision and the strategy, what will that transformation look like? What will the ideal state be of the future, and how will this connect together? The roadmap for implementation. So we've discussed a little bit about the process, about the vision for the future, the 2030, let's say, vision. We spoke about the transformation elements. And then, of course, we need to implement. So we need the roadmap, which needs to be long-term. I would suggest 3 to 5 years, and then go beyond the implementation, go into the performing and into the governance sustainability phase to ensure that the returns are delivering on the promise. So the efficiencies in terms of productivity or sales growth or customer satisfaction, supporting a larger business base should all be there beyond the end of the implementation phase. So here again was a start, 2021. And then again, we built a roadmap around field service planning, scheduling optimization, installation processes, installed base, updating, implemented support centers, centralized support centers. So going from decentralized to centralized, taking our people with us. So development, engagement, training programs, hugely important. Part of our roadmap was knowledge management, so KM, developing knowledge management tools and implementing the IT systems and processes. Customer portal, so customers could self-serve themselves. Master data management, hugely important. And then, of course, supply chain for spare parts to ensure we had the right parts in the right place at the right time. So again, developing the roadmap, however you do that, this is a graphical format, which I think resonates quite well with service and avoids the too much PowerPoint and Excel type presentations. Then lastly, there's another element I always like in the service transformation. Again, the customer's at the center of everything we do. So taking the customer with us and mapping the customer journey. So in this case, we spoke about strategic partners and what were the pillars. The pillars were on global alignment for strategic partners. They were on building trust. We wanted to be an innovative leader as a service organization. It was all about customer care, giving our customers highest priority and ensuring we're a listening organization. And the way we did that really was around global master service level agreements, implementing a customer portal for self-help, implementing dedicated customer success teams so that the laboratory wasn't working just with one engineer or with one salesperson, they were enabled with a whole team to help them, regardless whether it's a spare part problem or a consumable problem, a product performance problem, a quality problem. There was a whole team behind our frontline service engineers to help our customers. Then, of course, uptime, responsiveness. So there's an engineer parachuting in. These customers had our highest priority, so number one. And then regular service reviews, business reviews. How are we doing against our service level agreement with the customer? So this was the customer journey, mapping that through these implementation phases of our vision, our strategy, our roadmap for the future. And again, of course, at the end is loyalty, promise delivered, high net promoter scores, and satisfaction, enabling us to capture higher revenues and bigger growth, and creating a lot of customer intimacy. So some of the what I call service superpowers for transformation is, firstly, ensure that the voice of customer is heard. And yeah, in Thermo Fisher, we say customer first. And that's in everything we do, the customer's first and foremost in what we go. So certainly around service transformation, one of the superpowers, customer first. Second one is having an immensely strong service culture, building and developing intentionally a strong service culture through the service transformation program, and doing that by intent. It doesn't happen by chance. That has to be designed. And then the third one, I would say, the service superpower for transformation would be around service leadership. So having a big ambition as a service leader, each of us, we need to challenge ourselves and step up to drive and have ambition to drive the change. It takes ambitious, aggressive, risk-taking, scary service leadership in some cases to make these transformations. Having the vision and inspiration, driving for change, and being painfully pragmatic and persistent. So we really have to ground ourselves, avoid chasing rainbows, and to ensure that what we're designing can be done realistically, practically for our service business. And then lastly, being a service people person. So again, it's all about people in the service business, and I really value servant leaders. I believe, and I model myself as a service leader and a servant leader. And I think these three superpowers have helped me in driving service transformation. And the culture is key, the customer first is key, and us as service leaders stepping up to drive the change is absolute paramount. We're at the front, and we need to lead from the front. So why do service transformation programs fail, or why aren't they as efficient as they could be? Some of my lessons learned. Firstly, the stakeholders don't understand or agree to the reasons for the change imperative, why we're changing, what is the need for change, and the call to action. That's key. And if they're not aligned across the whole business, not just within services, but across all the different stakeholders, that's one of the reasons that it's suboptimal or it can fail. There's no commonly agreed vision for the future of the service business. That's disparate between the sales team, the marketing team, between executives, finance, between service, between customers. What do they want? Do all those align, and are they all part and a commonly agreed vision for the future? If we don't agree and align from the beginning, then in my experience, it's not going to be a successful transformation, and it's going to have to change fairly dramatically along the journey to be successful. Stakeholders are not aligned on the priorities. That's key, bringing the stakeholders with. And that the business, often we implement models which are based inside out. So the way we used to do things, based on systems or processes or tools we have, the way we used to do things, designed around our business. So as it was, looking in the rearview mirror, instead really of looking outside, looking at best practices within our industries, within our own businesses, but more importantly, or just as importantly, is outside of our industries, looking at best practices in other industries and in other geographies is hugely helpful. Inside out thinking, that won't get us, and that won't be a true transformation. That will just be an automation of what we're doing today or changing the process, but it won't bring, in my view, true transformation. Often transformations, or what are seen as transformations, are IT centric. So it's all around a new service management system, a new process, a new CRS system. And they're driven by IT as opposed to being driven by service. So I believe strongly that the IT should follow the strategy and the vision and the service vision for the future, and not the other way around. And I've seen many times that the IT model is designed first or selected first, and then the vision, the strategy, the operating model follows that, rather than being designed from the outset. So again, that won't help for the future. And then the service leadership team. Often we have service leaders who are fantastic service engineers, service managers, but they've grown up. Many haven't had always formal service training, service leadership training, business training, commercial training, customer experience training, and some of the modeling training, IT training. So they lack often the experience and the competencies required to implement a very complex transformation. So that's key as well, understanding the organizational capability of the leadership from the outset. And lastly is the alignment between service and other functions, particularly at the C-suite level, at the executive level. So if the executives aren't aligned with us, with the service strategy and the transformation, then the funding won't be there, the backup won't be there, the top-down support won't be there. So again, crucial that there's alignment at the executive level, at the sponsorship level, at the executive sponsorship level of the transformation, why we're doing it, what impact it's going to have on the business, and what the view of the future will be. We need their support, and we need total alignment with no ambiguity. There's many challenges as well in transforming services. So organizational challenges is around how do we get alignment across the management team on how the business should operate. Different countries is often a huge challenge. If it's a global transformation, aligning across Europe, Germany, even within Europe, Germany, France, Italy, Spain. Europe is Europe, but there's many complexities and nuances within Europe. And there's countries that are part of Europe, but they're not part of Europe, like the UK, like Switzerland, and other countries. And then, of course, there's Japan, there's China, APAC, Americas, South America. So the world isn't flat. So how do we work with those businesses, which are often at different levels of maturity? How do we bring them all with the organization? How we design an operating model that works for a small, immature country at the same time as it works for an America or a Japan, for example. So that's hugely important. Again, I mentioned the outside-in perspective. Put the customer at the center of everything we do. Finding ways to change people behavior, to understand why we're changing. Stakeholder management, bringing them with us, and supporting them in understanding what we need them to do differently. What's different today than was done before? A transformation is just that. It needs to be a transformation. People need to change behaviors, systems, processes, organization. And so people are part of that, and they need to understand where they fit in. And then lastly, sustainability. The adoption of the new transformational organization, and then the cadence, and then delivering excellence around that. So once it's done, it's not done. It's sustaining it and ensuring that the whole process is leveraged for the future. Some of the technology challenges we face, and so many of the things around service transformation will be technology driven. We're living in an increasingly digital service age, so it's hugely important to comprehend the technology challenges in the transformation journey. So first is designing the vision and strategy for service IT, have a service IT roadmap for the future, and have a service transformation plan for service. So there's an overarching service transformation plan, but within that should be the IT transformational plan and roadmap. And that should be, that should follow the service transformation and not the other way around. Functional scope, hugely important. The service IT architecture, how is that going to fit together? The functionality, the integration, again, very important. And then data model and the governance, the master data governance, Garbage in, garbage out, we all know that. And then lastly, governance around the IT processes to ensure that the engineers will use the system in the way, and everyone will use the system in the way it was designed, and they use it in the right way. Because again, if there's inconsistency in implementation or changes across geographies, and it's used in different ways, then the data we won't be able to use meaningfully. So these are some of the challenges I faced before in implementing transformations, both from an organizational view and from a technology view. So some of the risks in implementation, the last sort of takeaway message really for me is, one of the biggest risks I've seen is the IT driving the transformation and the implementation, and it's hugely agile approach to the transformation and IT driven. And this for me, that just doesn't work. The business have to be driving the program, and IT has to be an enabling function to help. So there's a risk of being too overly agile from IT. So get the IT right and have IT follow the form and the design of your service transformation model. And secondly, the big need, I believe, for success is to create an implementation roadmap, hugely pragmatic, very practical, and make it look out over 5 to 10 years, and ensure that it involves all stakeholders. Everyone's comprehended. We don't leave anyone behind, and it's going to be several years, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. So it's as service leaders, we need to be ambitious to drive this. We need to step up. It's scary. It takes us out of our comfort zone. We have to lead from the front. We have to put the customers at the center of everything we do. And hopefully some of the approaches and the models I've discussed will give you some insights into at least my experience in driving service transformational change. I've also had the good fortune to have used the services of Noventum in 2 businesses in which I've worked, and they've been hugely helpful. So yeah, I recommend have a look at their website. There's an insights page, and you can see how they might be able to help you on your journey as well. Thank you, and good luck with your service transformation of the future.
Well, thank you. And I would like to take this opportunity to really thank Stephen for sitting down with me and having this very in-depth session for us on the service transformation. And he is indeed right that it takes quite a lot to go through that. And it's really interesting to see some of the aspects in terms of mindset and service leadership that he's highlighting here, which I think we will touch base on a little bit more in the panel later on. With that said, I would like to welcome our next speaker to the virtual space, who is Ali from ProntoForms. Hi, Ali. We can now see you. I'm glad to finally see you again. It's been half an hour.
Thank you, Lisa. Pleasure to be here.
I'm very happy to have you on board, of course, and I'm extremely excited to see your presentation here, because you're going to walk us through how the future is here now. And of course, what we can do today in terms of digital transformation in order to sort of reap the benefits and sort of have the rewarded outcome that we're looking for in our field service operations further down the line. And I think what you're trying to convey us with is actually that what we do today would transform the future and sort of what we can expect of our outcome in the future. Is that a good let's say, summary of what we're going to hear?
Absolutely. I think, from our perspective, and you've just heard a wonderful summary of a transformation journey. What I'm here to present to you today is a perspective of not only being a vendor, provider, facilitator of field service automation software, but the perspective of the empirical data that we've collected, what we've learned from our customers that we've worked with over the last 20 years, and share that perspective on how that molds the future of transformation. And I think you'll see a lot of convergence with what you've just heard in terms of a particular transformation roadmap and what we envision will happen in the future. So we'll walk through a couple of those situations in terms of how that can be laid out in a transformation journey, covering the best practices and really the spotlights that individuals should be aware of as transformational leaders that are on this call today.
I would just say, go ahead, Ali, and walk us through this. And of course, yet again, to the audience, if you have questions for Ali, you can pop them into the Q&As, and I will take them at the end of Ali's presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. So as Lisa mentioned, we're here to talk about transformation. Our perspective today is primarily routed in understanding what is transformation, and there was some good dialogue on the last conversation, the last presentation, as it relates to differentiating what is transformation. And I was thrilled to see there's a differentiation between optimization and transformation. And so I often start to describe transformation by what it is not first. Transformation is not change. And going forward, I'm going to use the word optimization in place of the word change, because there is a differentiation point. But the key element here to understand is that transformation can only occur when you completely depart from your existing business models, your existing value proposition, and you define that new value proposition for your customers. As an example, you are bringing new products and services to market, and you are driving new and enhanced business outcomes. That is really what transformation is about. Optimization, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with optimization, is really the first step in the transformation journey. And you saw that quite nicely on the prior presentation in that opening slide with that roadmap. Optimization is really finding a better way at doing what you're doing today while still retaining your value proposition and your business model. So you're not necessarily turning out new products and digital services, but in fact, you're just finding different ways of delivering a higher level of productivity, or perhaps you're saving on cost, you're driving your operational margins at a new level, and you're driving another level of customer experience as it relates, or as measured through Net Promoter Score, loyalty and satisfaction. One of the other things, interesting statistic that you'll see at the bottom of the slide here from Gartner, speaks to the culture, right? We heard about the people and the culture. Why is it so important to have a very good understanding of why the culture must be ready to embrace transformation? And that culture is important not only across the entire organization, but in the functional areas as well, when you're dealing with the business, in particular service operations, when you're dealing with IT and how you get those two organizational groups working together. So before we move down the path of looking at the different forms of transformations and the catalysts for transformation, I'd like to share with you some new data that has come to fruition in the last little while around leadership. So we as transformational leaders on this call today, there are a couple of important imperatives that have surfaced in terms of things that we should have line of sight to. And you see them on the left-hand side of this particular screen. And I'd like to start and focus on a few of these in particular, starting with this notion of an ecosystem, right? Creating value in your ecosystems, extending your current reach with your customers, interacting with your customers in new ways, leveraging integrators between solutions, your customers, and how you connect to back office systems. Extending those ecosystems is a great way of understanding how you can provide additional value and ultimately redefine your mission, your purpose with respect to your customer base. The second thing that I want to touch on is this notion of an outcome-oriented business. It is a very common, my background is in analytics and data, incidentally, and it's very common for organizations as a first step in transformation to focus on measuring activities. And the issue with measuring activities is it doesn't necessarily tie to any element of value or a known business outcome. And so it's critical to make sure that we have a clearly established pathway around the outcomes that we're attempting to influence, and then working backwards through that model so that our digital processes, our business processes are connected to those outcomes. And then finally, from a leadership perspective, it's an opportunity for each of us to evaluate our self-efficacy as leaders in terms of, are we approaching leadership in the right approach? Is this an opportunity to disrupt how we're leading our organizations through transformational change? On the right-hand side of this visual, you will see some new data that's emerged in regards to what's defined as the leadership paradox. And so the backdrop behind this is as follows. A group of leaders, respondents were asked to survey back the question of what are the most critical leadership paradoxes from your perspective in terms of driving transformational change. And so you can see I've pulled out here a summary of that data, and it basically identifies the paradoxes in terms of being strategic and being an execution, someone who's skilled at execution around a particular strategy, as well as being tech savvy, but understanding the human touch versus the tech touch, and then notions of the humble hero and somebody who is traditional in terms of the business approach, but also an innovator. And so these are defined and expected to be paradoxes. And respondents were asked about the relevancy. How important are these with respect to driving transformational leadership? So those are the blue columns that you see on the visual. On the orange is the proficiency of the existing leaders in those respective organizations that were surveyed. So you can see the disparity, the gap, the coverage between the requirement, the relevance of those characteristics, and the current level of proficiency. And so I think the gap that you see across each one of those is an interesting perspective in terms of how we can use this data to drive that introspective, self-review of our own self-efficacy and our skills, and how do we approach and redefine the social contract that we have with field service technicians as a whole and other members of the organization that are going to help fuel the transformation that you're defining. So if we look at the catalysts for digital transformation, historically for the last 20, 25 years, transformation has been rooted primarily across people, technology, and process. And there's a new paradigm, obviously, that's emerging now as it relates to customers. What is it about our customers and understanding the experience of our customers and their expectations that should be fueled into the digital transformation pathway? So what I'm going to do with you is drill down into three of these in particular as catalysts for transformation. We'll talk about the people themselves in terms of field service technicians, as well as the supporting operational service teams and the IT teams and how we can drive alignment. We will talk about technology in itself as a potential disruptor for field-centric service delivery and redefining, transforming that field service delivery model and the process. And through the process, there are two critical pieces that are now starting to emerge in the literature as it relates to the notion of composable business, which is a Gartner term. And really, composable business really defines your ability to be resilient, right? And business resiliency has certainly been something that we collectively across the world have experienced over the last 2.5 years in regards to the global pandemic. So the resiliency and the ability to adapt to the requirements and the ever-changing needs of the ecosystem around us are critical to business process management and evolving the existing business processes to a new way of working. Coupled with that is this idea of hyper-automation, which essentially states that everything that can be automated is projected to ultimately become fully automated and interconnected across numerous systems, and defining how humans interact with all of the automation that's around us in terms of the technology and the systems that we're engaged with. And incidentally, the data that I have seen suggests that we've already been on this hyper-automation pathway globally. And in fact, the expectation is that the hyper-automation phase would likely come to an end by the year 2025. So at this stage, the number suggests that we're about 60 to 65% of our way through that hyper-automation cycle, with everything else going through the final stages of automation in the next 3 years. So we start with people as that fundamental first step in as being a transformational catalyst. I'll draw your attention to the graphic on the right. And before I walk through those numbers, I want to roll you back about 25, 30 years. John Cotter, who is associated with the Harvard Business School, about 25, 30 years ago, made a bold statement that 70% of organizations will fail with their transformational projects. That was, a fairly bold statement. No empirical data behind that. But if you fast forward over the last 25, 30 years, when you look at the empirical analyses that have been done, in fact, some recent meta-analyses that have been completed, the data suggests that, in fact, John Carter was quite correct. What you see there in that visual is a recent survey, a study that was conducted going back and looking at several years worth of data from 2016 to 2020 that walks through the trajectory of transformation for 128 companies. And they measured their transformational success based on, did they achieve a financial breakthrough in terms of cost saving, new revenue generation capabilities, and additional revenue streams, or did they essentially completely transform themselves both financially and in terms of reputation? The reputation in particular was viewed as two-dimensional. The reputation from their existing customer base, as well as the reputation, the satisfaction from the well-being of its employees. So there are numerous companies, large, well-known logos that have gone through this transformation and did get down to that final, the quick math tells me that's about 22% conversion from 128 to 28 around a fully successfully deployed transformation. So those are the data points surrounding transformation. If you look on the far left, we talk about the critical pieces as they relate to people with regards to transformation. Number one, the guidance is inclusivity, must be able to include field service technicians, service operations folks, IT folks, in terms of understanding their requirements, understanding the day in the life of a field service technician, acknowledging the differences in terms of how they approach day-to-day work, and redefining, again, what I talked about earlier as it relates to your value proposition to your customers. This is a wonderful opportunity, is redefining who we are and what we mean individually and collectively to our customers. The technician itself, a lot of focus and attention on the technician, the well-being of the technician as it relates to their satisfaction, because the data certainly supports that satisfaction of technicians is strongly correlated to the satisfaction of the end customers. In fact, I'd say there's likely an element of causality that's tied into that, though I haven't seen any data to fully support that, but there is strong correlation. The other aspect is the readiness of the technician. In order to understand how a technician can be more productive and optimize their day-to-day tasks, preparing them for those tasks in terms of measuring and understanding their readiness, the skills that they have, providing them with that just-in-time training is going to be critical to the overall success for driving transformation. And then new emerging thought and re-emerging is this area of HOP, human and organizational performance, which is primarily rooted on the fact that human error is a part of who we are in terms of it being a normal element of our day-to-day tasks and the work we do. Blame fixes nothing in regards to finger pointing as it relates to defining a gap in an operational process. It's an opportunity to fix that operational process and enhance it. And then finally, with people, there is the engagement, and you'll see that this is one of the critical first steps in the transformation maturity model, making sure that we are constantly as leaders using this as an opportunity to state the mission, restate the mission, clarify the outcomes, and make sure that we're engaging in dialogue to truly find a better way at completing the work that needs to be tasked in the field. Now, if we look at technology, shifting to the second fundamental pillar of transformation as a catalyst, one of the notions that I often come across, and I've just returned from a week of visiting clients on site, is this notion of digital ambition, right? So declaring your digital ambition, which is your ability to embrace existing and new technology that's emerging. And this is really a measure of your risk tolerance. How much of that are you willing to embrace to change what you're currently doing today versus in the future? So this is that mix between digital business optimization. So that's the change element, enhancing what you're doing today, making sure that you're focused on the key elements as it relates to experience, as it relates to the revenue, perhaps your operation margins and your productivity, while still retaining the existing business models and the value proposition, versus your forward-looking, horizon view of how you can potentially transform your business. And again, the recognition here is that transformation is a little bit more of a risk in terms of having an aggressive level of ambition, but it's leading to a completely new business model built on a new value proposition and ultimately delivering a new set of services and products to your customers. And then moving to the third fundamental pillar as it relates to solutions. This is a perspective that I've pulled out from our own data that we've collected on our customer base. And so we, as a low-code application provider for field service automation, we think of our solutions as our leading solution use cases. On the far left, you see them grouped by environment, health, and safety, asset lifecycle management, and customer relationship. And under each one of those are the leading solutions that we build with our customers. When we work with our customers and deploy these solutions, we will often go back and ask about what is the leading business impact of the solution that's been deployed. The data that you see on the far right is the aggregate of all of those solutions in terms of the business impact. And many of these solutions have more than one business impact. It is not a one-to-one cardinality by any means. It's a many-to-many relationship. But undoubtedly, there are 5 or 6 leading areas in terms of soliciting an impact of the business with respect to these hyper-automated solutions that are designed to be transformational. Now, admittedly, many of these first solutions for our customers are really that first step in optimization rather than a full transformational rollout, but digitization is absolutely the first step in an optimization pathway. And you can see that those elements that are surfacing around business impact as it relates to process improvement, data quality, reduced administration, so savings on time, safety, compliance, and reporting, and then the overall lifespan of the product itself are definitely key and first and foremost for our customers when they're thinking about finding a new way of working as it relates to digitizing an existing solution. And that really just means coming off of the paper to a digital solution, but that affords you some unique opportunities to start to think about transformation. One of the most fundamental ones, and you heard this on the prior presentation, has to do with data. When you are transforming your solutions, the process that you are conducting field service management by in a digital context, you are driving an element of quality of the data as well as governance, because you now have standards that you're putting in place as it relates to how data is captured through the context of field service management workflow. Additionally, through an automated solution, you are providing governance in terms of a guided workflow. So that drives through efficiency in terms of the improvements that you'll see moving through. You will also find a reduction in time, and then ultimately safety again, because that guided element of the workflow. So that's a fundamental critical piece as it relates to solutions being a transformational catalyst. Now we come to our digital maturity model. And this is a model that we've created and started to engage our customers with. And we're happy to share that with all of you here today, defined on fundamental, what I define as 4 E's, right? Envision, engage, execute, and enhance. So we start with that envision stage, the very bottom left of this continuum. It's important to use this as an opportunity when you're embarking upon transformation to define the outcomes. What is it that you're working or attempting to influence through this transformational endeavor? And the first step that we often embark upon with our customers is process mapping. Now, I would suggest that this can be done from an IT and a business perspective. So if the business is defining what are the future outcomes they wish to establish, then process mapping is a great way to pull in elements of the business and IT in terms of getting clarity on these are the new sets of processes and the different steps that we want to be able to complete. This is a great opportunity to pull in elements of design thinking where you have co-ideation and co-creation before you actually build a solution. And again, this can be done from a vendor customer perspective. It can also be completed internally from the business and the IT perspective. Data lineage and literacy is absolutely critical at this stage when you're defining your outcomes and mapping out your processes, because it's an opportunity to ask yourselves, what data do we not have today that is required to make the decisions for tomorrow? And so this is where those fundamental, 4 V's of data surface in terms of the variety of data that you have, that you're collecting today. Is the data structured and unstructured? What does that mix look like? How will you optimize it? How are you streaming data from IoT sensors that are out in the field? How will you use that? And how do you currently connect that data into some of the legacy systems that are currently in place? So collection of data is the first step, but it's by no means the last step. You must be able to find a way to attach that data to existing systems and to existing data that's collected so that you can drive a higher level of decision making. That ultimately means that you must have literacy, a strong understanding of that data itself, what the signals are from that data, and how it can be mapped into your decision-making process. Through that alone, you've now established that first layer of governance around the data. And so master data management becomes very critical in this very first step. Once you have those 3 pieces mapped out, from the process, the lineage, as well as the literacy and the governance, you can now start to surface those organizational metrics that you are ultimately driving. And from a transformation perspective, they are traditionally falling into 4 fundamental pillars, those being some element or measure of operational efficiency or productivity, revenue itself, the margins that you're attempting to influence, the cost reduction piece, and then the satisfaction as it relates to your customers, whether it's satisfaction or some element or degree of a net promoter score that speaks to loyalty. Moving to the second stage, we are at the engagement stage. So I talked about the importance of people as a catalyst, and this is where it really hones in on understanding why the people are being pulled into this conversation as it relates to mapping out what is the new way of defining process and how work gets completed in a timely manner from a field service perspective, as well as making sure that we have the opportunity to overlay different processes. For example, if you're conducting a safety audit, can you complete or converge compliance work that needs to be done at the same time, while also turning that into a potential revenue generating opportunity through perhaps a quote pricing system solution that can be integrated into a same digital workflow. And so this is a way that you can build convergence around different workflows and provide some flexibility for a field service technician. It's also critical at this stage to think about that drive between aligning IT and line of business. The goal is not to separate or create a divide, but to align them in the middle. And a great way to do that is through this notion of shared partnership, shared responsibilities based on the needs of the business, and then aligning IT to it, rather than investing in the tool first and then trying to get the business to bend to the capabilities of that particular tool. At the same time, I think IT has a certain role to play here as it relates to that bimodal or two-speed aspect of IT, which is the day-to-day operations of the business in terms of maintaining systems and lights on versus a view on the horizon. What new technology can be looked at and brought in and proposed to the business and put in front of a technology adoption or steering committee, again, which should be a joint ownership. And that really drives the innovation aspect. At this stage, I want to pivot out of the model and touch on the topic that you see on the far left, which is digital dexterity. So digital dexterity essentially is defined as the ability of an individual or an organization to take technology as well as their ambition and combine them together to drive better business outcomes. And so digital dexterity is now becoming one of the emerging indicators, leading indicators as to how successful an organization will be with their transformation. In fact, the data states that organizations that have a high degree of digital dexterity are 3 times more likely to become successful with their transformation initiatives. And so some of the things I have seen large-scale enterprise customers do is to stand up an internal digital marketplace, if you will, where they would map out the requirements, the problems that are attempting to solve, and the technology or skills that are needed to solve those problems. And they're opening that up, that opportunity to the entire organization, looking for individuals to engage in these composable business unit functions that are built on adaptability, responsiveness, and business resiliency. So it's a great way to drive a fundamental higher level of digital dexterity in an organization by engaging people to help solve those problems and define those new ways of working. I'll pivot back into the maturity model and talk about the execution phase. So now that a company has really moved forward in their transformational roadmap and agenda, this is where we start building solutions. And through solutions, you are defining best practices. You are making sure that new solutions are adhering to those practices. You're standing up centers of excellence. You're flowing information and requests for information through a very focused, responsible group that understands the importance of how solutions should be created, and they become your trusted advisors. They also become the trusted advisors of the end customers in itself, because they're typically that first point of contact. It's also an opportunity to remind individuals, remind the organization why we are doing what we're doing as it relates to transformation, and how these changes are connecting to these new outcomes that ultimately drive new value and business value for the company, and then ultimately enhance the customer experience. At the top right, we're at the final stage of maturation as it relates to digital transformation, is the scaling level. So once we've reached and deployed a subset of transformation, this is really where we continue to drive an additional level of sponsorship across the leadership tier, whether it's the C-suite or the tier below, and making sure that we have strong committees that are built around driving future adoption of technologies, yet also, again, keeping an eye on the horizon. Because at some point, regardless of the industry that we are all in and the industries that we serve, there are going to be inflection points in the growth of those industries. Those inflection points are typically going to be the leading indicators or the early warning signals that disruption is coming. And so through transformation, we are always attempting to anticipate when is that disruption coming in our respective industry. And there are numerous cited examples of disruptions that are happening across numerous industries. The last thing I want to call out is this notion of derailment. The most fundamental aspect of digital transformation is maintaining change and managing that change and communicating throughout this entire process. If you are misaligned with respect to those fundamental pieces, you're misaligned with the needs of the culture itself, the field service perspective, the metrics or the data itself, or you're misaligned in terms of the skill set of the organization and what you would like to be able to accomplish, the problems that you're attempting to solve, or you don't have the supporting infrastructure, or your ecosystem has not been well thought out or defined, you're ultimately going to find yourself stagnating between one or two of these stages. And so often when I'm engaging with customers, I'll find that the story is very similar, that, you know, we've started a transformation, but we can't seem to extend beyond step 2, or we're stuck between 2 and 3, and we really need some assistance in terms of understanding how do we start to scale or circle back and correct some of the mistakes that we potentially made in the past. And you saw those in the prior presentation, and they're absolutely spot on in terms of what I've heard and read from our respective customers or the analyst data that is out there today. So my last thing is, you know, how do we as a vendor in terms of ProntoForms, how do we create that best in field transformational experience? Really, this slide speaks to my opening slide, which is transformation is rooted across people, process, and technology. From the people perspective, we are here to empower, you know, field service technicians. The process itself is the operational piece, how that drives transformation. And again, through the content that I've shared with you here today, we have some strong thought leadership skills in terms of understanding how to drive and you know, plan for transformation. And then the technology aspect, not only connecting, integrating to back office systems, but finding new disruptive technologies, embedding those into existing workflows is how we work best at serving the needs of our customers. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time today, and I will pass back to Lisa and hope to engage with you on the panel later in the session.
Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing, Ali, and a really interesting presentation. And I think, as you say, it really tied into the previous presentation by Stephen as well. So that is, of course, two sides of the same coin in one sense, but from, of course, one being an end user practitioner and you, of course, coming from the vendor universe, but at the same time, you're having the same thought, the same vision, and the same sort of view on how things should be done. I do have a questions for you, looking at your, of course, the 4 different steps, and you say that many get stuck between step 2 and 3, which is, of course, the gap between the vision and the execution. And I think I'm going to throw an assumption out here that a lot of that is the challenge is actually getting, your internal ambassadors on board, and driving change internally is always a change in mindset. It's always one of the toughest parts in terms of doing transformations. And you say that ProntoForms is really good at empowering the field technician. So how do you overcome that gap in terms of getting people on board into the transformation?
It's a great question. I often think of, our target audience in terms of field service as the classic bell curve. Mm. And as you know, in the bell curve, you have those early adopters on the far right. So those, mathematically would be your people that are beyond, 2.5, 3 standard deviations above the mean. And then the ones on the far left of the bell curve are the laggards. But those that are in the middle, I always define them as the straws in the wind. They'll bend in the direction based on the signals, the early signals. And so I think working with those strong adopters, early adopters, is critical. But more importantly is adopting an iterative process around solution development and refinement. So being engaged in the testing of field service solutions in real time. We will often deploy people on site as solutions are being tested, or we will accompany, I myself will accompany field service technicians on site with their supervisors, and we'll walk through and make adjustments, what needs to be fixed, what needs to be adjusted. Because we're a low code application platform, those changes can be done in relatively close to real time with very little background or information in terms of understanding. And so being nimble and agile, absolutely critical in terms of being responsive and driving adoption. And listening to the feedback is absolutely critical, how that feedback gets utilized to develop a new, better version of an existing solution.
Okay, so I would like to thank you there, Ali, because we will have more time to dig deeper into some of these aspects in the panel later on. But we will move on to our next set of speakers. That will be Aric from Flowserve and Kevin from PTC. Welcome to the virtual stage.
Hey, Lisa, how are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you, Kevin. And I know you and Aric are going to have a little bit of a conversation on how Flowserve has, through their connected products and services, managed to better predict, run, protect, act. All of the great words were in the session titles there. And I guess, Aric, we will hear from you then on how you use this from a, I guess, then predictive maintenance model in order to better schedule and predict failures, and the also engineer efficiency that ties into this, of course. But I will let the two of you have this discussion between you. And yet again, I encourage the audience to post any questions into the chat or the Q&A function, and I will post them to Kevin and Aric either as we go along, if there's an opening for it, or at the end of the discussion. So over to you guys.
Great. All right. Hey, thank you all for showing up today. I am happy to be joined by Aric, our good friend and colleague from the Flowserve side of the house. I'm going to give a quick introduction for myself, then I'll let Aric introduce him. But I'm Kevin Flowserve. I'm the Vice President of IoT Marketing here at PTC. For those of you who don't know us, PTC is one of the main players in the industrial manufacturing solutions space. We actually own several technologies that include CAD, PLM, augmented reality, as well as Internet of Things. And we've been in the space for 30+ years. And I think that we always like to say that we help companies design, build, service, support any kind of industrial machinery. And so we've been fortunate enough to be in, for the last several years, having a really good relationship with Aric and Flowserve. So I'm going to turn the page to Aric, and why don't you give us some insight about you yourself as well as Flowserve?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you to the Copperberg team. So first of all, a warm welcome to everybody that signed in. My name is Aric Zurek. I'm the Vice President for Flowserve's Internet of Things business, IoT. And prior to this role, I was in the aftermarket business, so parts and services. I led marketing, technology, engineering. And so I've got a little bit of experience from that end. And then prior to that, 20 plus years in field services with General Electric. So a lot of time in field service and leading services organizations. So I am absolutely thrilled to be with you all here today. Kevin, thanks for the introduction. What I want to do is it's a little bit different. I want to have a dialogue, if we can, with some of the participants. So I know there's a lot of folks out there. If you've got questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I'll answer them live as I go through some of the questions. And then Kevin and I, we've got a little bit of Q&A that will go back and forth. I think the unique thing about this particular session, I'm in the midst of a digital transformation myself. So I'll talk a little bit about some of those lessons learned, how you take an old bricks and mortar company like Flowserve. We've been around for, let's say, 215 years. So it's a very old American company. We're in 55 countries. We've got about 17,000 employees and about $4 billion in sales. And traditionally an original equipment manufacturer of pump seals and valves. And so a lot of the industries we serve, power, oil and gas, heavy industry, mining, chemical, petrochemical. And so that's the traditional market for us, but IoT is really opening up kind of a new lens in digital and diversifying the customer base. So with that, I think we'll get into it. Kevin, if you want to go through the questions.
Yeah, definitely. One thing, even before there, I think one of the things that it surprised me is the scale and the size of scope of what you actually create. So we actually have one up in our CX, our Customer Experience Center. It's relatively, smaller thing. There are some that you actually produce that I'm thinking I'm 6'3". I probably can stand in the middle of, and basically with my arms out wide. So just for everybody to understand that these are some very massive devices of machinery that Flowserve is actually building. So just to put that in perspective. So one of the questions I ask is, like you said, can you start, you mentioned the digital transformation. Talk to us, what led you to the part where you actually started thinking about it, and then what, and where you are right now in that journey? Yeah,
absolutely, Kevin. So interesting story. So again, I talked about Flowserve's history, 200 plus years old. How does a company get into this? And we had some, you listen from our colleagues, Ollie, and some of these folks that talk about digital innovators and some of the early thought-provoking leaders in our business. They came up with what we call the art of the possible. And so we actually partnered with PTC, I think with National Instruments at the time, a couple other folks in that consortium. And we pulled together one of our smaller pumps, and we said, what's possible in terms of predictive analytics? How do you connect these devices? When I look at our installed base of just Flowserve equipment that's around the world, it's more than 7 million pieces of equipment that are out there with a Flowserve brand name on it, right? And so that speaks to the volume of assets that are out there that we could potentially help our customers track more data on. So we pulled together this demonstration unit that Kevin's talking about that we have up in Boston at their headquarters. And we quickly found that it was possible. We could do predictive analytics. We could have unique algorithms. We could instrument these, let's say, heavy iron devices. And then it almost cascaded. So we had probably 3 or 4 people on that early team. Today, we're more than 65 people in this organization, a couple $1 million in revenue. And so we've gone through this process of creating growth within this traditional business segment. And I think it was the first speaker that talked about new sources of revenue. And so it's really interesting for us because you create new value in the market for our customers. It's something new. It's a new service. It's a new capability that didn't exist before. It's traditionally replacing what we call walk-around services. So the old style of doing things is send out field engineers into the field, which is a great model. It's been working for 100 years plus. They take data, they take information, they take instrumentation readings. They come back and digest that information and maybe review that with experts. With things like digital, you can quickly accelerate that information cycle. And so now, instead of pulling information on a piece of equipment every 30 days or every 60 days, you can reduce that to every 30 minutes or every 15 minutes. And so the availability of catching a failure or something going wrong in the field, that probability goes way up. And so that allows us as a service provider, where we've got, let's say, over 200 service centers around the world, we can quickly dispatch a traditional field engineer to then diagnose that specific piece of equipment that's having an issue. And so that really, for us, that accelerates the revenue stream. It provides the customer a much better level of service, even traditional service. And then, of course, we're tracking and tracing all that information and data. So now we have a nice, you could call it like a patient health record of that asset in the field. And so we started kind of in a conference room pilot of, hey, what's possible? What could we do? let's build it, and then let's go step by step and scale the business that way. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that, of the way I view digital transformation. It doesn't have to be you don't have to have a huge 10-year plan. You can actually go step by step and just say, hey, how do we take the next logical step? And then how do we move forward from there? So that's how we did it.
That's a great question. And I want to basically tease something you said. As historically, every 30 days, I'm walking around the plant. I basically do this and analyze it. And now you're getting in 30 minutes, you can find out something's going wrong. Can you help quantify for our audience exactly what that actually means to not only Flowserve, but your end-use customer, the benefit of actually understanding it quicker?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of examples that come to mind. So there's a big one that we talk about all the time that was actually for a steel mill application in the United States. This customer had, large furnaces where they used to create the molten metal, shape it into the large block, and then roll out that steel. Those ovens, they're roughly $15-16 million a piece, as I recall. And so if that cooling water that's being provided to keep those ovens at a regulated temperature, if that furnace goes down, the damage or repair on that service of that asset for the customer could be $15 or $20 million, depending on the requirement to replace it, rip it out, put in new equipment, and that sort of thing. And so for a relatively small investment in IoT, you've got that coverage and you've got that peace of mind. So we're seeing quick adoption on that. A little less extreme example, just last week, and it's the first one that came to mind. We're serving a customer in the UK. And so they've got some fans instrumented. I think it's a power application at an airport. And it was, I think, 12:01 p.m., right? Most people are not looking at their fans out in their power plant at that time. Well, one of our engineers actually in India noticed that there was a high vibration suddenly, and it was obvious. It ticked up, and suddenly there's high, heavy vibration. There was bearing damage, is what our system could tell us. And we said, hey, to the customer, you better go take a look at that piece of equipment. Sure enough, they deployed somebody out into the field. They looked at it, and they had a bird strike on the fan. And they knew right away, and they said it's probably a bird strike, but they hadn't realized that it happened. And so you're talking about these are large industrial fans. It's probably $10,000 or $20,000 repair potentially, and much more damage if that piece of equipment had to be completely replaced. And again, so for a couple $100 or $1,000, you're able to quickly identify that issue. We notify the customer, and again, I know there's a lot of service personnel here on this call, to have that quick connection and know exactly what's happening at an airport power plant in the UK, but diagnose it from India. Fantastic, right? To have that level of connection and trust. The customer then came back and said, hey, I've got, half a dozen other fans on this site. Can we talk about those? Right. So that's an immediate opportunity for us to in this case, we didn't do the repair because we don't do fans, but we certainly help the customer solve their problem. And the next time it might be a pump, a seal, or a valve, which we do manufacture. Tremendous opportunity for us to serve the customer and be first.
Yeah, well, that's actually a great point that you just basically brought up in terms of the fact that you are actually able to not only monitor Flowserve, but you're also able to do other things that are out there, other equipment that's out there, and being able to do both really gives a holistic view of everything that's going on within a particular facility, which actually is a great opportunity. And like one of the reasons IoT, the agnostic nature of it, has basically been very powerful, I believe.
Yeah. That's right. And I would say I'm sitting here thinking, kudos to the PTC team, because one of the things we did early on, Kevin, you talked about how did we get to this point in this journey? At one point, we thought we could do everything ourselves. And so that's a call to action for the folks listening. Don't make that assumption, or don't fall into that trap that I made early on. We can be great at software. We can be great at instrumentation. Let's do the analytics. Let's be responsible for the service. So I think we did well to learn about all those things, but then we quickly realized we're not a software company. Let's talk to partners in industry like PTC that do this for a living, right? It's a professional task that you guys, in terms of an IoT platform and some of the other engineering tools that you guys produce. My call to action on the folks for this call is make sure you partner with the right people in the industry. There's lots of folks that can do different things well. And so Flowserve quickly recognized, hey, here's what we do well. We understand the equipment. We understand the failure modes. Let's be good at that. And let's not decide to be good at everything, because that tremendously slowed us down. And by allowing us to focus on the types of equipment and the failure modes, but we didn't have to worry about the platform and the software piece of it, that helped us move a lot faster.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think you actually acknowledged a little bit earlier, but I'm going to basically bring it back up. It takes a village. It takes a village. You talk about the ecosystem. It started off with, I believe it was National Instruments, maybe I think HPE, as well as, PTC. and Flowserve working together to kind of get that. And I think that's one of the key elements that I would actually advise anybody out here listening is that really it's not just what one partner, it's that partner in the full ecosystem, being able to ensure that it's going to be able to work seamlessly within your environment. So, you know, there are a lot of one-off solutions, but it's just that one-off, you're not going to be able to do a lot with it. Think about somebody who can actually scale as you basically scale and grow, the same way you've actually done your business.
Yeah, I'm going to build on that too, Kevin, because one of the things I think, you know, I would imagine maybe half of the audience here is thinking about digital transformation or how do you create a digital services business. I will caution you and give words of advice. It's not easy, right? You said it takes a village. And so some of the things that we quickly found out, and it's almost a mantra I have all the time. I say, I'm not worried about the technology. Like, that's actually the least of my concern because we have tons of smart engineers. The devices work great. The communications, the telecommunications, we partnered, let's say, with Vodafone to move the cellular backhaul. Those things work great, right? Because those companies do those things well. I would also caution the team, let's take a look at the processes. So one of the things we had to do quickly on in the traditional services is say, yeah, we're going to get the IoT instrumentation in the field, but how does the repair shop know? Or how does the field service technician get notified? Simple things like how do you book the order? Because the commercial terms on these things are a little bit different. You're talking about data privacy. You're talking about security, IT security. So different set of stakeholders, they have different questions. It's not your traditional field engineer sale to the reliability engineer, right? Where there's like maybe a one-to-one transaction or that relationship has been there. So going into digital creates all these new relationships and I would say capabilities. So you have to not just package the technology, there's all the business processes, supply chain, legal considerations, commercial, contracting, all those things have to be built on to whatever you're doing in terms of digital. It probably applies to lots of transformations like Ali had talked about, but that was a lesson learned for us. Like, don't forget about the other things.
Oh, that's a great point because, you know, we see that as well, that, you know, it's the days are long gone of basically being able to call up one person, your friend or your colleague, and say, hey, place an order. You have to get the entire company basically on board. And that is a skill set. It's not just something that comes natural because you have to ensure that your message is going to resonate with that audience because they may not see it at the time. Like, okay, I don't get this. Being able to kind of translate it out is really going to be the key thing.
Yep.
So with that being the case, is you talk about, you know, Flowserve and the aftermarket business in particular, right? You talk about this transformation. At one point in time, services may have been considered more of a call center. Now it's basically moving more to a profit center or whatever else like that. Are you seeing that throughout your industry, or is it just basically Flowserve just basically is on the cutting edge of that?
I'll answer it a different way. So I think in Flowserve, at least, and in other companies that I worked at, services is always is a fantastic profit lever for the business, right? You tend to do very well in services and parts and services. It's also that maintaining that constant connection with the customer. And so it's extremely important to maintain those relationships. So I think in Flowserve, it's always been recognized as it's a way to create, you know, good additional revenue streams. I think what's different about digital is, I quickly alluded to it, it's the commercial model is a little bit different. So most parts and services businesses are very transactional. So you can have a transactional event on a part. If a service team is a little bit more sophisticated, you might have long-term service contracts. And if you're really sophisticated, you go into more performance contracts. The way digital kind of squeezes in there is now you have a way to measure the performance of those contracts. So you can take a baseline at the beginning, you can instrument whatever it is that you're instrumenting, pump seals and valves or elevators or farm equipment or whatever it is that you're into in terms of IoT. And now you can track that performance over time. So I actually see it's a huge enabler for more performance-based and more mature types of contracting. So
then that's a great answer. I mean, my question, it leads into a different one. We kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. We talked about the challenges in terms of, as you first started off, you were like, okay, it's not the one-to-one, you have to basically get the network. What other challenges did you actually see? I'm thinking one is that you mentioned a little bit earlier about the privacy, data privacy. Can you talk to the team or everybody who's listening more in terms of those objections that you actually had to deal with?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's really interesting. Let me pick a couple of them. So the first, let's go customer back. So on the customer front, yeah, certainly it was data privacy. What are you going to do with my information? You know, can we move the data to the cloud over my dead body? Right. That was 2 or 3 years ago. There's no way that people wanted to move the information to the cloud. That has changed. And so I think, you know, thinking about the pandemic and COVID, and we're all experiencing it, right? This meeting right now over Zoom, it seems very normal. But we didn't do this 3 or 4 years ago. It was less normal. Let's all get together in a room and wherever we may be meeting. and have this discussion. But now we're very comfortable in this environment. So I think customers' perception of technology has changed, and they're much, much more open to doing that. So security and like the flow of information. I think the second one I want to talk about, and this is a barrier, so this is for the folks on the call today, the sales path is a little bit different, right? So you're challenging, in our case, we're looking at folks that maybe have 30, 35 years plus of experience of that relationship selling. And so they're selling heavy equipment, they're selling something that they have a strong understanding of. Maybe they were a field engineer early in their career, so that's their comfort zone. And suddenly I come in with my team and I say, hey, you got to learn how to sell, heart-enabled wireless networking, right? That's not in the language of the people that traditionally sell. And so you have to develop an organizational structure to support those people, right? You want them to be successful in the field as salespeople, but you have to provide them the right level of information and sales training, and then backup support of technical experts to do that. So that was a barrier. So the sales team actually being comfortable approaching the customer. Then you go into things like fulfillment models. So supply chain is very different, right? So we do some electrical actuation equipment, control systems, and that sort of thing. But now suddenly I'm signing contracts with PTC, or maybe it's Microsoft or AWS, or those contracting models are very different where you're getting into licensing of software. Again, that's very new for some of the supply chain folks and purchasing folks that we work with. And how do you build inventory and prepare for these eventual IoT contracts? So you can almost go through all the layers. And again, I go back to the holistic thinking. I think Ollie talked about integrators. You do have to be a good integrator, because you got to go to the supply chain and speak their language and say, here's why it's important. Here are the risks. Here's how we have to have contracting models around software. And you could play that story through all the different functions that you have to integrate with. So yeah, great question.
Yeah, and then a quick follow-up, kind of going back to a little bit earlier when we were talking about the fan situation at the airport, brownfield versus greenfield. Is there a best way to start? Do you just start with all new? Basically, go back, help everyone understand. I know you have to do both. I think that's the whole thing. If you're going to start digital transformation, you're going to have to do both. Is there a better way to actually get started with that?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a funny answer, and I'm going to be very transparent. Aftermarket's the hardest way to start. I started in aftermarket and heavy iron, right? The pumps that have no instrumentation, and I'm talking to people in the field that maybe they don't want to instrument the pumps. They don't know how to instrument. So we actually started at probably the worst place. So lesson learned for those on the phone and in the video conference, figure out where the easy adoption would take place, right? So it's probably, now we're actually releasing IoT and we call it Red Raven. So Red Raven for our valve devices and digital control valves. I should have started there because those devices are already digital. I'm talking to instrumentation and control customers, right? They speak the language of HART or Modbus or whatever it is. So very much more adaptive customer. And so it's actually easier. So it's 6, 1.5 dozen the other, because I could have started with maybe those easy folks, but I never would have made it into pumps, but I started with the most difficult. Anyway, back to your question, aftermarket versus original equipment. The goal has got to be to the original equipment, because if you think about maybe your automobile or something that's a Tesla is already connected to the internet, it's like that much easier way to do it. You're just turning on and off services at that point. When you go into the aftermarket, you're talking about changing wiring. You're talking about physical documentation and permits and certifications that you have to get to walk into, let's say, a large chemical facility to make those changes, shut down the process, instrument the valves, and then bring the process back up online. Much, much harder. So the good news is Flowserve's good at that. We have a history of doing heavy equipment modifications and repairs, so we know how to do that. But depending on the industry, I think we as a team here on the phone, we need to think about how do you get the new design engineers to embed IoT into the new products. And so we're early in that journey. We've got a few products that do that, but I'm championing hard to make that happen in Flowserve.
That's great. And you mentioned Red Raven. I think that is I want to basically turn our attention to that. You just introduced it earlier this year, but it's a great testament to think about what we did. Started with it in a conference room, this crazy idea, to now actually the evolution to where you are launching the Red Raven. Can you tell the audience more detail about what that actually is? Yeah,
absolutely. And yeah, it's interesting that we branded it and launched it that way. So you're a marketing guy. So I think it's, for those folks that think about how do you launch a new digital services component of your business, we did that on purpose, right? We didn't go out and say, here's new equipment or new hardware, and by the way, it's digital. We intentionally said, hey, we're putting something in the market that is not traditional. And so let's give it a name, let's give it a banner. And so we call it Red Raven. If you look at the rest of our products and services, they don't have names like that. Like this is a very unique thing. And we've had a lot of traction around that. So I think the customers are excited about it. Our employees are excited about it. Basically what it is, was your question, is it's really a platform and a way to connect devices and connect ourselves digitally to our customers. So we spent a lot of time on the foundation of the architecture, and I won't go into the IT or the OT side of things, but we basically had to build all these security layers. We had to set up the servers and the networks, and then the communication protocol for all the devices. So we did two things. We looked at the equipment that we already designed that we can connect. So mostly that's digital control valves. And then we figured out, okay, what do you have to get data from the field, let's say on a heavy iron piece of equipment? So that's an aftermarket thing, which we had to design and build our own sensor. We didn't really want to do that, but we did it because we looked in the market and we said, hey, for nuclear applications, hazardous, explosive area zones, things that we're good at, by the way, let's make sure we have something that's bulletproof that we can put out in the field to collect and manage that data. And now we're in the process of saying, okay, all this information is coming in. It's something like 70,000 signals a minute. It's a huge pipeline of data. And we're just getting started. So now we're figuring out, okay, what do we do with that data? Where do we store it? How do we manipulate it? There's a question I want to get to this. So thinking about AI and machine learning and that sort of thing. I know this is a bridge, but we're doing two things with that. So one is taking a look at that big pool of data, that big ball of data, and saying, what can you learn from an AI standpoint? There must be patterns, right? And so I'll leave it at that, but I imagine there's a lot we can learn from that. The other thing we do is we do have bespoke algorithms for the specific equipment types that we manufacture. So we're not experts in everything, but we want to be expert in what we make. And so we do have very nice algorithms that say, hey, if it's a pump, we know that algorithm says that the shaft is cracked, right? Something as simple as that. But that is very valuable because when we go to the field, we know what to bring. We know that we're looking at a rotor repair. We're looking at the bearings have to be replaced. Maybe it's the mechanical seal. That's a huge leg up on the competition in terms of knowing you can roll a truck to the field and be ready to, you're going to see what you're ready to see.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, somebody basically said, know before you go. And that's exactly what that insight actually provides, is to let you understand, before you actually roll that truck, basically make sure you have it, because the worst thing that you can do is to show up at your customer and be like, okay, now I understand. It's going to take me 3 weeks to order the part or whatever the case is.
Yeah. What's the problem? Yeah. And that's traditional, right? That's reactive. Yeah. What's the problem?
Yeah. But I think that, and just like you said, it's a new norm in terms of how we actually like utilizing a Zoom call or whatever else the case is. Now, our customers are having a new normal. Our expectation is that it's almost 24/7 uptime. No issue with that. How do we actually basically help them with that as well? So
yeah, I can imagine in the future, can't you see the field engineer is going to roll into the field, and if something's not instrumented, they're going to be frustrated because they're going to say, where's the digital record? Where's all the information? I got to go to my truck and call somebody. That's very frustrating, but that's what they do today. So now how do you kind of accelerate that? Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a great point. I mean, I'll take the ball real quickly. I think that's one of our technologies, the augmented reality side, really kind of helps with that in particular. So, if you actually are able to utilize, what we're finding is there's a graying of the workforce, a silvering of the workforce, especially in certain locations. How are we transferring that knowledge and doing it most effectively so that we're able to actually bring people up to speed, those field service technicians up as quickly as possible, as well as with all the devices that are coming in with more technology? That's a little bit of overwhelming. It's not the situation where you basically kind of go listen to a click or whatever else like that and know exactly all the details. There are still those that exist like that, but you have to basically get a little bit more expansive of that. And our augmented reality products actually help that, because we can now actually paint over that and provide that service technician, hey, here are the steps that you need to do to actually change the filter, or basically to service it one way or the other. And it's just a great opportunity of how we're actually able to connect the IoT with the augmented reality to really provide our end customer that full service that he or she needs. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One thing I'm being cognizant of time too, and please everyone, if more questions into the chat, because I can basically talk to Aric forever in a day. But one thing that it does come to mind is you're talking about the predictive analytics side of it. Data for data's sake is nothing, right? Can you help the audience understand the predictive analytics and how you're utilizing it? You've kind of given a little bit earlier, but a little bit more detail now.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, this topic can go on for a long time, but basically there's two types of offerings that we have to kind of unpack what is Red Raven. So traditionally we'll do condition-based monitoring. And so that's, I think everybody's familiar with that. It's pressure, temperature, thresholds, limits, alarms. And then what you'll see is a trend over time, right? And an analyst can sit there, you and I can spot a trend. There, we apply a little bit of analytics on there to say, hey, we're seeing this behavior, it's statistical. We think there's an issue. The system will actually kick out an alert or an alarm, not just to the folks in the monitoring center, the Flowserve employees, but also to the customer, so they get that information. So that's that bird strike example. Then in addition to that, for certain pumps, customers will select their critical assets or valves or seals, and they'll say, hey, these are my top 10 assets in the field. This is worth wiring. And so when you're talking about condition-based monitoring, it's traditionally on wireless, because in an aftermarket setting, right, you don't want to run cables, you don't want to run power. So we just put in some aftermarket devices. There's a simple gateway and a little power box. So you just plug that into the wall and you're off and running, you're getting information. On the predictive side, you need that information because maybe you mentioned at the beginning, we sell nuclear recirculation pumps, right? $4 or $5 million assets out there. At that case, you want data every 2-3 seconds, right? Because if there's a failure in a piece of equipment in that application, you want to know. So in that case, we run wires, we run cables, we fully power the device, and the refresh rate's a lot higher. Well, the advantage of getting all that data much faster and a higher frequency, and frankly, a bigger pipeline, is you can run real-time analytics. So we used to run some of those on the edge. We've moved all that into the cloud now, so we can actually run and process the data pretty quickly for a lot of assets. And then that, again, I mentioned it, it'll tell you the failure modes and the mechanisms and the root cause and the preventative action. So we're getting better. You saw the chart earlier where we said it's preventative, now it's predictive, now it's, I can't remember what the next one was, but you're much more positioned to serve the customer. Yeah, that's what we're doing. So now we can say it's the bearing or it's the shaft or whatever. If you're talking about a valve, it gets even more complicated, because I think in Flowserve valves, we get something like 150 data streams of information, and it gets into, well, the closure rate is not fast enough, or there's not enough torque when it seals. There could be blockage. It's not seating correctly, right? All those things. And then we actually put a corrective action for the technician, for the customer, to say, hey, we recommend tightening these to this many foot-pounds of torque. Please go out and check this. So it gets very prescriptive. That's what prescriptive analytics, to making sure that we can tell the customer how to do that. Well, that's all based in the analytics that's either on board the control valve itself, which it has been for years. We just had to figure out how to unlock that and share that information, or it's based in the new analytics which are in the cloud. And so that's what we're doing. I could say it's, as you guys look at predictive analytics and whatnot, it's fairly easy to create all those. What I would say is the more difficult challenge is how do you codify them, and how do you package them, and how do you enable them in a structure so that it's quick and scalable, and you're able to securely do that without, let's say, giving away IP, but giving the customer enough information to do what they need to do. So that's a balance. And so I kind of circled the topic, but.
No, I think that's good. But you mentioned something quickly, I know that we still deal with, and you mentioned cloud. Not everybody's ready to basically put everything up to the cloud. There's still what we call on-premise or on-prem there. Can you talk to them about what you're seeing in terms of like movement from on-prem to cloud from your perspective?
Sure, it's a continuum. And so I think I kind of hinted at that earlier. 2-3 years ago, no cloud, everything has to be on-prem, in my fence only. I think it's getting more specific now. When you talk to customers that are nuclear or some of the heavy oil and gas majors, they still have very strong security requirements for great reasons, right? Pipelines and that sort of thing. It must be protected. And so in that case, you can put an on-prem solution. It's quite a bit more expensive because you're talking about licensing and setting up a whole infrastructure for that customer, but it's doable. What I'm seeing more now is almost a hybrid approach where they say, okay, we're okay with a cloud-based service, or maybe it'll be on-prem, but we're going to allow you to look at the data, and you can VPN and share the data and almost just visualize it, but we're not going to give you access directly. That's one way that they do it. And in general, I am seeing more adoptive culture towards cloud-based services. I see it more in, I would call it light industry. You talk about food and beverage, maybe water, wastewater, sewage, some of those things. It's not as critical to the process or proprietary. If you talk to a large multinational oil and gas company, they feel rightfully so that's protected information. And so again, it's on a spectrum, but that whole spectrum is moving closer towards digital.
Yeah, but I think the key element is the fact that not every vendor can basically do both. somewhere basically
Yeah.
I can only do it this way. Going back to the ecosystem, having somebody who can actually span that is going to be the critical thing that we would ask anybody in the audience to consider as they're kind of moving on down that path. I know we're nearing time. I'm trying to make sure I've basically covered all the ones that I wanted to. The one thing that I will basically say, and Lisa, you can please help me if there's anything else that's coming up in the chat. A couple of things that I want to basically, but before I ask you this, one question. When you talked about Red Raven, you talked about the fact that it was more of an evolution. The one thing that I would like to basically ensure that people understand is that IoT itself is going through an evolution. If you think about where we were, 2008 and before 2010 timeframe, nowhere where we are today. And part of the reason why is within that evolution, we actually have learnings. And I can say on behalf of PTC, what we found is that we realized that companies are now recognize the value from IoT, but they don't want to actually do the science project to get it up and running. They want to actually kind of have something that basically is out the box, deployable, and then kind of move forward. And so you'll see the shift. While we still have ThingWorx platform, which is a leading IoT platform that Aric and his team have actually built upon, we also basically are saying that how do we take that same platform and then bring more out-of-the-box solutions to the market so that our customers can realize that value even faster, because a project for the sake of a project is not doing anybody any good. What are the business values that you're going to derive? And so you'll see that. And we've actually seen it in terms of what Aric has done within Red Raven to be able to kind of do the exact same thing, provide that insight there. One thing I do want to say though, Aric, I love when I heard the reason that you named it Red Raven. Can you talk about it? About the whole, I think that's actually a cool story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in the beginning, I thought Red Raven, like when the marketing team came to me, I was like, man, where's that coming from? Yeah, it was really, well, red is the color of Flowserve. So that's kind of where the red comes from. We talked about the Raven as like a bringer of news, and, good or bad, sometimes that news is not always what you want, right? So it's not really like the peaceful dove, right? That's not the information that we're sending. Some of the news can be tough. And so the Raven was considered like a trusted messenger. And it basically has the ability to have oversight and overwatch over all the facilities and all the assets. And so there's some of these visuals at play, right? And so we've had a good time with the branding, and I think it's done really well in terms of adoption. We didn't know, we took a risk, and right away, the first 4 or 5 customer meetings I went in, they said, that name is great. How did you guys come up with that? So I said, oh yeah, it was our idea. Absolutely. Yeah, no, it was good. Yeah, I credit them. The marketing team, like the traditional, they came out and said, we're going to be wild. Let's call it Red Raven. Okay.
And that's, as a marketer, I was like, that is so great. So I guess as we get ready to close, the last question I have for you, Aric, is, are there any additional key lessons that we may not have touched upon right now, how a company should prepare for that digital transformation journey that you would like to share with them?
Yeah, I think I talked about it, like keeping one foot in reality. You were just alluding to like the purgatory of pilots. Right. Yeah. And I've seen this in so many presentations where there's IoT companies and they kind of get stuck in pilot after pilot. I would say, it's pretty traditional comment, but like keep your head down, just keep making one more step forward, improve the contracting, improve the technology, add more resources to support the customer when there's issues in the field. You got to think about the whole business and then just take another step forward and another step. So don't get too wound up on, hey, we got one pilot. That's not good enough. You got to go out and say, okay, let's not do another pilot. Let's do a small commercial deployment. Okay, now that we did a small one, let's do a larger, more complex, and just keep adding those layers. And it's taken forever, but you turn back and look, in the last 12 or 24 months, and we think, oh my gosh, we've made such a journey. But it's a marathon. That was the other comment. It is not. You cannot race to the finish line. You got to have grit and determination, and you just keep going, and you'll get there. Yeah, you'll get there.
Aric, thank you. I think that this is basically exactly what I was wanting to hope with having that conversation and inform the audience just in general what to look like for that digital transformation. So Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm not sure if you have anything for us.
Of course I do. I'm not just going to sit and be quiet. No, but it was very interesting, and thank you so much for sharing. And indeed, an impressive digital transformation journey. One thing that actually comes to my mind immediately is first of all, the massive amount of products in your installed base, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we're touching upon in the beginning. And then I'm going to play the devil's advocate here then for a while, as many in the audience probably represent the industrial manufacturing, more traditional organizations. So there is a gap between the old and the new, right? You have your installed base that are definitely not connected. There might even be obsolete machinery. the data there, we all know it's analog, if even. And how do you bridge that gap then in terms of, because someone might argue then that, but I can't predict the maintenance jobs that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Whilst the other side might say, but the data is still helping us forecast the health and the sort of maturity level of the old assets. So which one are you leaning towards, and how are you modeling this to bridge the gap?
Yeah, exactly. And I think Kevin asked me the question about brownfield versus greenfield.
Yeah.
So it is a spectrum. Like many of my answers, it depends. I think, no matter who you choose for your instrumentation in the IoT space, there's very simple low-cost devices that you can collect. Temperature, right? Temperature can tell you a lot about things. Vibration is a very valuable tool. And you're just linearly taking that one piece of information. It's better than nothing, right? And then you move your curve up and you say, hey, this is a fully, $2 or $3 million piece of equipment. Yeah, it's worth the full instrumentation package. And so you have that full spectrum. And so I would say it's never too late. You can apply IoT to internal manufacturing like CNC machines. We had one of our internal facilities say, hey, can you at least just instrument my CNC machines and tell me when they're on or off, right? Are they running or are they not running on a traditional mill or a lathe, like the old hand tools? You can do it on anything. So it just, you may not get all the information, but you'll get something.
Yeah. And I think also one of the things I often hear is still that the data provides you with insights that you can sort of model on the non-connected machinery, even if you have zero information about them. But it's kind of, you can make a truth based on the sort of the probability of things.
That's right.
Of course, with different algorithms and variables into the system. Another aspect is, of course, the field service technicians. As you were saying, now we have these connected machinery and use yourself predicted a shift maybe in how the technician will act further down the line and in the future. We will cover that in the panel, but how do you incentivize your technicians to sort of use and input data? I know, Kevin, you touched upon it about some training aspects that PTC provides, but I mean, there's also mindset and a change that needs to happen. So how do you incentivize them? Yeah,
that's a tough and tricky question because there's generational gaps, there's comfort level with technology. All those things are very real. What I would say is, we're developing some software specifically for the field services folks, and we involve them early on. I think somebody talked about user-centered design earlier, like, design customer experience. Well, in that case, those are also my customers. And so we're developing mobile apps that projects a lot of the same information so they can pull it out of their pocket and look at the information. That's going to make their lives easier. And so make it in a form factor that they're used to using, which is, everybody's on iPhones today all day. So why not put it in that form factor, and it'll make their lives a little bit more comfortable. So I think over time, you'll eventually see that
there is obviously. And then, of course, I mean, one of the things that you were talking about, of course, a lot of the aftermarket modeling. And of course, I mean, we call it service business aftermarket. Definitely here in Europe, we use the, service model a lot, designed for service. And as you say, the last maybe 20 years or something, it's become less transactional and more of a service lifecycle management approach. And as you say, we see performance-based, outcome-based, Rolls-Royce method, powered by the hour, a lot of different business models. All of this, of course, requires KPIs and service metrics. Otherwise, I mean, how can you do performance-based if you can't measure the performance? So what kind of new service metrics have you implemented? You don't have to go into details, but that actually comes out of your connected machinery that you now can use to affect your bottom line.
Yeah, I think we're not quite connecting all the dots yet, to be very honest. So I think a lot of the IoT is starting to merge with the OT. I met with a large partner yesterday, and we were talking about digital software that can maybe bridge that gap between OT and IoT. And so how do you look at things like inventory management or cycle time? I mean, that's a direct business metric that says, hey, we may be carrying 20 or 30 or 50% more inventory than we need, but we don't know until you have the metrics on what types of seals are failing or what shafts have to be replaced. So if you're using old traditional forecasting means you're probably carrying too much. And so with things like IoT, maybe you can optimize that. The other thing is speed to service. So the cycle time, if it used to take 2 to 4 days to tear apart a pump and kind of visually look for the issue, IoT brings that digital health record that says, hey, there's a strong indication the rotor is cracked. Why don't we start with that? You may find other things, but so that'll reduce that disassembly, clean inspection time that we talk about in the pump world. When you service something, you got to tear it all apart. And if you can reduce that by even 40%, that's a huge win for the customer. They get that unit back up online.
And
Yeah,
of course, sorry, Kevin, yeah.
I just want to basically add to that. I think that one of the things we really didn't get into discussion, but is the digital thread. Basically having that concept where you're actually bringing in the entirety of that information from either your PLM system, your CAD drawings, to understand how to basically break it down. All of those things are very intrinsic in terms of actually allowing us to kind of move forward. So that's one of the key elements that I will always basically say is, as you're looking there, start there, maybe start with your IoT, but as you across the IT/OT convergence, look at beyond that to the entirety of that digital thread, and that you're going to get even a greater value with your investment by doing that.
Yeah, spot on. Exactly right. Yeah.
And I agree. I think we have to start somewhere, but I see there's a lot of aspects of the service metrics we will probably see down the line on how this ties into the overall organizational sort of ambitions. And I mean, we will definitely see bottom line effects on this. And because you started off, Kevin, to saying also it's been regarded as a cost center. But we also do see that it can be a revenue generator and a profit center, not only bringing revenue. So that's something we really look forward to. And I think, IoT is definitely in the core of enabling that going forward. So I would like to thank you so much for this discussion. And of course, I invite you back to share some more thoughts in the panel in about half an hour. Now I will actually go on with our next presentation that is by Aquant. And with me today, I have Sydney, who is the guy you will see here in our session here in a second. He's a representative from Aquant, and Jason Smith, who is the Director of Field Services EMEA at 3D Systems. And Sydney will later on be joining us also in the panel, but they sat down before this broadcast to record a session because Jason's had a scheduling issue. But of course, they will take us through on how you best adapt your service to meet your customer demands. And as Sydney will be joining us in the panel later, I do recommend that if you have any specific questions that pop up during the video you're going to watch now, you can post them in the chat and I will raise them to Sydney afterwards. So I hope you enjoy this.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the keynote, How 3D Systems is Adapting Service to Meet Changing Customer Demands. Today's session will be recorded and a link to the recording will be shared with you all. I'm really happy everyone could join us today. It's my pleasure to introduce Jason Smith, Director of Field Service EMEA, 3D Systems, and Sydney Lara, Service Principal, Aquant. Without further ado, I will turn the stage over to you, Sydney.
All right, thank you so much, Courtney, for the introduction. I am super excited to have our guest today with us, Jason from 3D Systems. And before we get started, my name is Sydney Lara with Aquant, former service executive with many years of experience, now with Aquant, having a wonderful fireside chat with one of our customers, 3D Systems. And without further ado, I'll let Jason introduce himself, his role, his title, and what he does with 3D Systems. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you very much, Sydney. Yeah, thank you for having me and for the opportunity. A brief introduction. I work for 3D Systems. 3D Systems are one of the top players in terms of 3D printing machinery and additive manufacturing systems, the AM workflow. And in that context, I head up the field service operations for Europe, Middle East, Africa, and India. And it's my service teams that are responsible for the field service support that we offer our customers and partners. Really, we operate in some key verticals, one being industrial machines, which include things like automotive, transport sector, defense, aeronautics, aerospace, that kind of those kind of functions. And on the other side is healthcare. That is on the vertical. On the horizontal, we go through two channels. We divide our product ranges into production printers, which tend to be high value, more production oriented machines, which we support directly ourselves. And then we have a higher volume of lower value plastic printers, which we generally sell through a partner network. So it's my team that is responsible for the field service activities and supporting both of those channels and those verticals. things like new machine installation, initial customer training, through to service contracts, any ad hoc services throughout the whole machine life cycle.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason, for your introduction. For today's discussion, I really want to kind of focus on what we briefly talked about is the customer experience. I think it's fair to say for you and I and anybody else, nothing new, but year over year, everything gets more centrally driven towards the customer experience. So if I can ask you, Jason, what has 3D Systems been doing in the ways of service? You talked about your service responsibility in terms of improving the customer experience. Can you talk about any company-wide initiatives that you might be going through at the moment?
Yeah, certainly. I think one of the things, just to sort of set the groundwork for this this question, is the way that people need to think about 3D printing. There are a lot of ideas that it's something that you see on science fiction films, and while it's certainly a valid technology, the reality is a little bit different from what you see on Space Family Robinson or something like that. What we are looking at is a combination of hardware, of software, of materials, of knowledge, know-how, and training. And it's what I sort of alluded to earlier. It's an additive manufacturing workflow rather than pushing the button and something magical happens and it pops out the other end. And when you think of it in that kind of ecosystem, then what we are trying to do in terms of our customer experience is to marry up all those aspects so that the customer is able to get the best value out of that whole concept. And that's why we've offered such a broad range of products and services that really enable us to capture that whole end-to-end process and be able to deliver that expertise throughout. Typically, when something goes wrong, when you have an input and the output doesn't match what you thought it was going to be, it will be the hardware that gets the blame. Sometimes that's true, but there are other aspects, and it could be, like I said, the way that the build is being prepared or configured in terms of the layout. It could be the material, its viscosity, the ambient conditions, the preparation. It could be the way that the build is oriented. It could be the way it is processed afterwards. And really, for it to work effectively, we have to be sort of aware of the whole workflow so that we can say, well, okay, we can rule out this element. It's most likely to be that element. And if we can't help directly, for example, to say it's a materials issue, then we can find the experts within our organization in a one-stop shop kind of approach and be able to deliver that solution to the customer, regardless of where it is in the AM workflow.
So that's awesome, Jason. So well said. Thank you. I love what you brought into it. It's that full ecosystem of, you're not just plugging in your unit into the customer base. It's everything from the environment to raw materials that could have an impact on the output. And it's critical to understand all the variances that go into your product outside of just your actual product. It's the resources and everything before and after, and them having to be in sync, right? To have the optimal and the optimal output. But what you're saying is, that is what you're doing, is trying to understand everything before and after, and putting them all together to synchronize, right, the optimal product result, correct?
Absolutely. But for the areas that we are, fall more within our remit, we've got to be particularly good at those, the pillars, the foundations of field service. That is making sure that our field service support, the technical knowledge, the technical support that's available is quick, relevant to the point, and it comes up with that solution quickly, either for the customer directly through remote interventions, or that our field interventions are as quick and efficient as possible, with our supply chain backing us up, and the remote diagnostics that we do to ensure that we have the an optimum first time fix and the shortest mean time to repair as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's not forget the resources that support it on a daily basis, right? Yeah, thank you. When it comes to service challenges, Jason, what are some of the major challenges you would say today are stopping you or slowing down the pace of where you want to be when it comes to maximum customer satisfaction?
Okay, that's a really good question. It's probably one that's going to exceed the time we have available. But as a place to start, I think it's how do you leverage the skills and experience that you have within your organization in the most effective way possible. When you have an issue that you need to resolve, you don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. So how can you access the accumulated knowledge and experience that your service teams have got? How can you assimilate it? How can you analyze it? How can you disseminate it in the most effective way? And how can you interface that with all of the other supporting parts of your business that you need to affect an outcome? Doing that again in terms of the customer's perspective, what is relevant for their industry and to meet their expectations, bearing in mind that not all customers are equal, and not only that, their maturity levels and the way that they handle this as a technology is different. So you need to be able to adapt between new adopters and experienced users. So in itself, that presents a bit of a challenge in itself. And if we again go back to the fundamentals about have we got enough support in the right areas, in the right parts of the locations that we're supporting, how are they trained with not only the basic certifications to work on that equipment, but have we got the information coming back from the field in a closed loop fashion that we can constantly improve our effectiveness in terms of resolving those problems and relay that back into our engineering and quality systems so that we can avoid them in future iterations of that equipment.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that synchronization, harmonization of data flow, right, to give to your frontline support, as well as that feedback loop in terms of improving the product quality, right? I like the way you put all that together. And inevitably, probably a challenge for most everybody in the service world of how do you harness all this information? How do you make it available to everyone? Especially with the variation of the workforce experience, folks in the call center or the folks working on equipment in the field. But on that, Jason, on that note, what are you guys doing as 3D Systems, if anything, right, in terms of technologies or processes to help overcome some of those challenges we just talked about?
Again, another great question. We have adapted or adopted a range of new techniques. I mean, some are utilizing the data that we've always had, historical data. How do we access that? How do we, organize that so we can derive meaningful conclusions from it? So it's data management on one hand. It's also making use of the technology such as machine connectivity. So can we connect to the machines? What can they tell us about what they're doing? And the layers of data that produces is a very rich picture. It's in the context of what the machine is doing, with what, under what conditions and what circumstances, and how it's performing, with a view that it can tell us when something is beginning to go wrong, such that we can organize an intervention before we have an actual unplanned outage.
Yeah.
We then have a range of support tools, and I think COVID has been a time where we've kind of we were already on the path, but having to work in a different way, more remotely, it's kind of accelerated the way that we've had to support both our service teams and customers in the field. So communication tools, different networks, having sort of internal networks where we can share ideas and solutions to problems, that we can support people remotely through augmented reality. These are all aspects that we've introduced, as well as improvements to our supply chain in terms of both outbound and reverse logistics, and coping with various political challenges as well, such as Brexit in the UK.
Sure.
So it's really forced us to kind of rethink the options for harnessing new technologies and improvements, but also some traditional ones, and how can we be faster and better at doing that.
Yeah.
And key to all of that is having the right information to be able to make decisions. So access to the data, to be able to fashion it, analyze it, and use that data to make the right decisions in the first place.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I think, yeah, inevitably, you said it well, is the impact of the pandemic has really put us, on the balls of our feet in terms of being more creative, more nimble in terms of how do we get data more available. You talked about the remote diagnostics. You talk about how do we get training to our field techs, during the pandemic, more readily accessible. All great stuff, right? I think what we'd like to close this conversation, it's been a great conversation, is around, how do you see the value of, harnessing all this information that you just talked about, making it readily available, and what are you doing in terms of implementing this to connect, as you talked about in the beginning of our conversation, connecting all this information to other parts of the organization, and what strategies do you have around that?
Okay, well, again, using the tools that we have available, our database and the analysis tools, the analytics that go with it, it's been able to give us a lot more depth to what we are able to determine, and the speed of the analysis it does seem to be improving. We have some established metrics that we work to, which we believe are the most effective, not just KPIs for the sake of it, but lagging and leading KPIs as well, that help to inform those decisions. So we're looking at what's happened, how can we use that information to see what the reported fault was, what was the solution, what parts did we need, and then we can start to, again, using tools like AI is to help assess the probability of future failures, so that we're prepared for them when they come. And we can gear that up so that everything from behind supporting it, such as the technical information, the training, the supply chain, is geared up to support that, and knowing that that might be a problem, as well as feeding back to engineering that we need to do something about it. Similarly, there are other aspects that we can work on with that in terms of the service delivery itself, and how do well, it's not just a case of how do, but making sure that we have the right contact, that we are speaking to the right customers, that we have the up-to-date information. And I think it's really about some of the fundamentals are still just communication as well. Are we talking to the right people? Have we got the proper understanding of what's going on? And also, how can we, how can we leverage other parts of the organizational support to come back to affecting that outcome? If is it a training issue, can we, get the training teams involved to help overcome that? And are we doing it? Are we monitoring? Are we effective? So things like talking to the customers on a regular basis with a cadence that we can report to them what's happening, and are they seeing the improvements in the right direction, helps strengthen that partnership.
Yeah, I love that, Jason. That the way you just ended that piece was just the icing on the cake, right? I mean, having that proactive or that constant communication with the customer, right? To not assume that things are going well, but keeping that touch point with them, nurturing that relationship, I think is vital to any services, to nurturing that relationship and creating that customer trust. So yeah, thank you for your insight on that.
Pleasure.
I've had a fantastic, I know we had a short fireside chat here today, but I really enjoyed the insights you've helped illustrate and highlight of what you're doing to overcome some of these challenges that we're all faced with. Thank you, Jason, so much for participating in that wonderful conversation. We do appreciate it. I want to turn quickly now for the next few minutes and provide a product demonstration from a quant on our product called Service Insights. What you're looking at here is our dashboard, the executive overview tab, where we believe this tool will help bridge the gap on some of the concerns we just talked about in that chat. And we are confident will help most service leaders be a little more proactive on having tangible, ready, available information at your fingertips to be a little bit more proactive to service events that are happening within your workforce. What you're viewing here is the typical KPIs service leaders will monitor to keep a pulse on their business, such as first time fix, cost per success, mean time to resolution, and mean time between failures, and whether they're trending up or down. More importantly, I want to bring out this visual management around customer risk score. So we create algorithms around activities happening within your service workforce that might be of concern. So if there's a lot of activities or high cost activities happening at particular customers, we want to bring that to the forefront so you're able to address these before they become a customer escalation. We also like to pride ourselves on the ability to generate natural language information based on those activities. So specifically here, you notice why Wiffle is being called up as a top customer, because for Wiffle, you'll notice that they're experiencing a very high cost per success at $3,900, which is significantly higher than the typical average of the workforce for your assets within your team. Likewise, if you look at custom therapeutics, you'll notice that they're being called out on the customer risk score because their mean time to resolution is a lot higher than that it has been in the past. So also an executive overview tab will call up the most common failures and what other parts that are trending for those interested. But let's go into the customer tab. Again, I really believe that we all have a ton to learn from making the customer the forefront of our focus when it comes to services. And here you're looking at the customer tab, the aggregate view of all the different product types that you service and how those events aggregate over time. But when we pull up a specific customer on that risk score under the spotlight, you'll notice why this customer is being raised up by this with the index score. You see there was no activities for a few months in the beginning of the year, but over recent months, activities have spiked up, hence the obvious reason for the escalated score. More importantly, I want to point out is that as compared to the workforce average for all the assets, this customer is being serviced very poorly. So the mean time to resolution is at 30 days, and the mean time between events has gone now from 70 days down to 7 days. What's important to point out with the quant is that we look at these metrics under a 30-day window of observation, which means that if you're called out for an asset for service and you had to be called out again for whatever reason within 30 days, we're not going to consider that a successful visit until 30 days have lapsed before another request. So hence why you're seeing the additional cost being averaged into these metrics. What's important also to notice for this customer that has a higher score is we look at the workforce in 3 different classifications. We look at challengers being the lower end of the spectrum, contenders being the competent middle average technician, and then heroes being your most proficient top technicians, which are obviously not working on this customer based on this pie chart. But what's important to point out is that 87% of the folks working on them, these events have been classified as challengers. More specifically, you'll notice that Greg in this particular example has most of the visits for this customer. So I'm going to want to look at Greg to better understand how we can help improve Greg's performance as this customer, driving towards improved customer satisfaction. So I'm going to go to the workforce tab, pull up Greg to see some of the observations that might be contributing towards higher cost, poor first-time fix rate, et cetera. And when I look at Greg, you can see overall he's lower first-time fix, he's higher than the team. But for this particular customer, when we look at his observations and proficiencies, you'll notice there's things that he does at the customer that are lower than the team average, such as hose is leaking refrigerant. He's able to solve that a little bit cheaper than that of his peers. But a couple of observations we want to take notice to is where his costs are higher as comparison to his peers. So for this one, communication failure, you can see it costs Greg on average $5,400, where the workforce, when they're faced with that same observation, is typically solving it around $2,800. Likewise, with a service request for pump not working, it's costing him around $6,700 as compared to $2,500 for the rest of the workforce. So the idea here is not to be punitive towards Greg and making a comparison to the peers. Let's understand why Greg is applying more parts to address these observations, ideally to drive his cost down to be more aligned with the team average, driving down that customer risk score and improving towards customer satisfaction. So I want to bring up another customer example. The next one on the list was custom therapeutics. So we looked at the first customer and we kind of concluded that we have opportunity within the workforce to drive down those scores. Let's look at custom therapeutics. So when we look at custom therapeutics, you can see that activities again are climbing over the recent months. Again, we see that the KPIs are very skewed as compared to the total average amongst the complete fleet of services being done. But you'll notice here now we have a darker blue, meaning that we have a larger 96% of the workforce working on this customer are contenders. So to me, that draws an immediate flag that if we have a competent workforce working on the customer, why do we have the risk score climbing high? So I want to dig a little bit deeper and now look at the invoices associated to the customer. So when I look at this, what I do notice, what jumps out to me is I see a lot of cost in the labor column, but relatively a lot of visits with no cost associated to it. And then I look over to the serial number asset ID, and I notice that there's one particular asset being called out repetitively. So I'm going to want to take a closer look at that particular asset. So if I click that asset ID and go to that asset under the asset tab, what you notice now here is that an asset is relatively new. It was installed in 2018, but you'll notice at a few years into it, costs start climbing. And we talked about the contenders working on it, and we talked about the invoicing with parts not being applied, which would draw me to believe that we potentially have a training opportunity with the customer. Maybe customer misuse is causing the technician to go back into the asset and make slight tweaks or calibrations to that piece of equipment because he's not applying parts. But again, needs to be addressed with the customer. So maybe now you come up with some customer specific SOPs to drive down to reducing those visits, again, leading towards improved customer satisfaction and perception over the services and the asset performance. Let's take one final example here, Asheville University. If I look at Asheville University, we look at this asset, we see a lot more activity as compared to the previous customers. We scroll down again, KPIs are skewed as a result of the activities. But what's jumping out at me here now is that we have majority contenders. Well, actually, I'm sorry, 93% heroes and no challengers. So it's minimal contenders, but majority heroes, yet this customer's on our risk score. So we want to understand why that might be. So again, we're going to look down at the invoices. And what jumps out at me here, as compared to the last example, is that we're seeing significant parts cost being applied to a specific asset. So this asset you can see goes back to the beginning of the year, and it has had repetitive visits, and the visits are becoming more frequent as highlighted above in this chart. And you can see a lot of parts costs are being applied. So I'm going to look at this. I'm going to want to look at this asset under a closer view as we did the last example. When we look at this asset now, we can see it's a little bit older, now pushing 6 years of age. And we can see that the asset costs were in line, but right around the 5-year mark, you can start seeing they start climbing. But right when we get to about the 6-year mark, they start spiking up. So To me, that would look like we potentially have an end of life issue here because we have an older asset, we see more frequent visits, and we're seeing a lot more parts, high cost parts being applied to that particular asset, which means that we would probably want to upsell this customer on a new piece of asset to retain them as a customer and drive up customer satisfaction, as opposed to just going out to service and keep applying high costly parts, more frequent visits, leading toward customers dissatisfaction. So I'd like to leave that with you as something to think about as how we can help your organization drive improved performance towards customer satisfaction. We give you the ability to look at the workforce. So if the service leaders want to look at their team under a lens holistically or drive it down by region, service leaders can take action to drive up some of the behaviors of first time fix by giving you a compare and contrast and allowing service leaders to create actionability around what can we do to drive the first time fix of the lower performing team members to be more like the ones that perform higher. Likewise, what can we do and understand under the observations with this data to drive down the cost per success variation amongst the team. So that's all I have time to share with you today on our product. I do encourage you to go visit our website to learn more at aquant.io. And if you have any questions on this demo, please feel free to email me at serviceexpert.aquant.io as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. In addition, please stick around post this call, as in this event, we'll have the panel discussion following this. Thank you again for your time and hope to hear from you soon.
And I would like to take the opportunity to thank Sydney and Jason, of course, for sitting down and sharing this. I know, Sydney, you are now joining us remotely here at the very end of the event. How are you doing?
Very good, Lisa. How are you?
I'm very good. Good to see you. There you are. Are you in a hotel room somewhere?
I am in sunny California, so I can't complain.
No, I was about to say nothing is, you don't have a hard time. I'm in pitch dark Sweden, winter, winter tires are on. I don't feel sorry for you at all.
Yeah, it's 80 degrees here, so yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, Jason is also always a great guy to see in terms of, he's an old friend of Copperberg as well. I think he's been visiting some of our events for the last decade almost. So it's always good to see Jason. But one of the things, of course, that you were covering in your session here is, new customer demands. How do you meet them? How do you engage with customers differently? Do you see an effect after the let's say, pandemic, or that the pandemic has affected the way we have changed our customer demands?
Yeah, great question. Coincidentally, I'm at a service conference here in California. And I think a lot of the topics we talk about is the increased customer demand of quicker and cheaper services. And we reference it as to customers expecting to live in the Amazon world, right? Everything's immediate. The transparency of visibility of services, that connectivity to have visibility to what's happening when is the expectation. So I think it's really has really upped the game for most companies to have put in systems that make a customer feel comfortable to provide technologies, transparency, and quicker services. Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. And with that, I would actually take us straight into the panel debate or discussion here. So I would like to welcome Ali and Aric back to the stage. And yes, there you are. And also glad having you back. And thank you for sticking around so we can sort of summarize the learning experience of today in this setting. And of course, the panel will also be available online for those who want to go back and look at just the panel later on. But I have then some interesting questions in line for us. And the first one would be, of course, the let's call it the macro environmental changes or any sort of disruption that happens due to volatility in the macro environment, such as the pandemic. it kind of shines the light on some of the flaws, weaknesses, bad sides, or room for improvement in our service operation. And where do you think we have any lessons learned when this, post-pandemic, we're not really post yet. I'm in Europe, we are definitely seeing a turnaround again in the wrong direction. But in the learning curve that we're at, where do we see that we have room for improvement that this actually taught us? Anyone wants to start on that?
Yeah, I'll jump in first. This is Aric. On the Flowserve side, yeah, so we actually had quite a bit of issue getting to customer sites. And so our field service personnel, even though they're the qualified repair technicians and whatnot, we had to go through a lot of hoops and certification requirements and security blocks getting through to back to the customer site. So many sites said, no, we're not accepting any visitors. Please tell us how to do the work. So that, IoT for me, that's actually a great enabler, because we said, oh my gosh, we launched this at almost the exact same time. I wish I was 12 months earlier, because we would have been even better. And then, the use of AR, VR. So Kevin on the interview there talked a little bit about that. We actually had to have some salespeople that were local. Let's say in Italy, we couldn't get anybody in and out. So one of my sales associates actually did some of the installation and configuration for the hardware, right? Normally they just do sales, but in this case, he actually had to go hands-on, and we had the technical team from the US helping him out. So trying to figure out different ways to do the work. So, I think it'll create patterns for the future of how we do work for field services later.
Indeed. And I think that's actually we've probably disrupted some of the traditional job descriptions as well, don't we? I mean, yeah. I'm from a company that traditionally did events as well. I mean, in terms of on-site events, and of course, that's no longer possible. And how you do digital is, of course, a different story. But that is, I think, and do you think, Ali and Sydney, that, I mean, customers of yours today has a different contingency based on this? I mean, in terms of, do they use their data, their analytics in a different, more proactive way to sort of be better responsive in terms of if it happens again or next time?
I would absolutely agree. In fact, that was my initial thought, is that, the last 2.5 years has given a lot of companies an opportunity to actually mine their own data, as well as understand what are the opportunities for improvements, regardless of, the great things that Aric talked about in terms of how you pivot to adjust to the needs of your service base in terms of your install base. But mining the data has really, I think, accelerated people on that continuum of analytics. And if I think of that continuum as a 4-step process, it's descriptive, meaning answering the question, tell me what's happened, then moving into the realm of predictive, which I think has pushed a lot of people along that continuum much faster than anticipated, answering the question of what will happen, and then ultimately getting to the prescriptive piece that Aric had spoken about, which is tell me what I should do about it. And now, as I'm engaging with customers, they're thinking about the 4th step, which is that machine learning component, which is how will the system learn from what has happened in the past, and how can it predict and prevent either a truck roll or just additional insight in terms of feeding back real-time data. So I think that whole process has evolved much faster, I think to everybody's advantage, quite honestly. And it's a difficult process to traverse, but the situation we're in, I think, going back to business resilience, this is a great opportunity, the output of being resilient with respect to your business and serving the needs of your customers.
And do you think any specific aspects of field service, were triggered, fast-tracked? I mean, in these circumstances, of course, we know, I must say, then being in field service and doing aftermarket content for it, I mean, since 2009, I mean, the digital adoption was already happening. We're talking about IoT and, connected services, and that's nothing new under the sun per se. But what aspects of this do you think? Is it the actual deployment in the organizations, or the let's say the buy-in, or what is it that has changed?
I think what I have seen, and I've certainly validated with customers and prospects alike, is that if you think of a field service technician in the ecosystem they're in on a particular site, I think about the sensory inputs, which are driven by eyes, ears, voice, touch, and brain. And what this has done from a vendor perspective is it accelerated R&D approaches in terms of what are the inputs of the interactions with all of those 5 senses in the context of existing field service management. So voice-driven, hands-free, assisted devices, that Aric had spoken about, as well as Sydney, in terms of how those assisted devices are being plugged into existing workflows. And one of the emerging trends that I'm seeing is digital twinning, in terms of being able to survey a particular environment and compare that digital to its twin as the gold standard, and using that as an opportunity to identify opportunities that need to be addressed when somebody's actually on site. So it's about that preparation that's been discussed throughout the conversations today, the readiness for appearing on site and being somewhat proactive. So those are the emerging thoughts that I've seen, both from an internal vendor perspective as well as what I'm hearing from customers.
And what do you think, Sydney, in terms of, are there any specific, aspects that you think are here to stay that we picked up on in terms of, fast tracking some of the deployments here?
Yeah, outside of what Aric and Ali said, they've brought some great, tremendous insights. It's really that customer ability to self-diagnose, right? They want to do more on their own. Obviously, it maximizes uptime, but obviously with the pandemic, it creates that safety factor as well. And I think that's we talked about, they talked about, I think it was Ali and Aric, of augmented reality. Again, I'm at the show and there's many booths with the Google lenses out there. So a lot more of that is continuing to see a trend in the business, allowing us to walk customers through to solve the problems on their own. So yeah.
And I think I read in the latest Gartner report that the remote support technology is now like 60% of the respondents are now using it, compared to 18% just a couple of years ago. So I mean, it's a 300% increase, which is of course remarkable. And that, I think, is definitely something that the pandemic has,
Absolutely.
The technology was here and there was a business case for it, but the fact that we were forced to give away some control, because it's always been a matter of who owns it. It's warranties, it's insurances, it's control, it's aspects that are very hard and rigid and sometimes not easy to get around. We were forced or strong-armed into that. And that
Absolutely.
is, on the other hand, maybe a very good outcome, because as we were discussing, I think in the speaker waiting room before we launched this webinar today, was that we're now able to turn, fine tune our diagnostics, because the fact that we can disqualify service errands or service jobs that are actually maybe easy to do from a remote place, or can be disqualified if you want to from the more advanced engineer jobs that actually needs the attention of the engineer, and therefore we have a better way of processing which job goes to which person. I don't know
Correct.
if you agree there.
Yeah, completely. I think I'm not trying to plug my business right now, but understanding what technicians are competent and capable for what types of jobs is so critical, right? I mean, the expectation of leveling up the technician quality and maximizing customer uptime is the expectation. Customer demands are just much higher. So yeah, I think it's critical. Yeah.
And I think that ties in. I mean, one service metrics that at least I bump into all the time is increased engineer utilization rate. I mean, this is something that it is a cost if it's not done in the right way, but it could be an absolute asset to the organization if they're scheduled correctly, if the right guy is at the right place at the right time. It increases customer satisfaction, uptime, output, whatever you may, right? So there's a win-win here. Compared to having a more random methodology to this. You're nodding, Aric. Is that something you're also, is that a metric that you hope, in the end will be the outcome of your sort of predictive maintenance data that you're pulling out of your connected machinery?
Yeah, the reason I'm sitting here smiling because I'm thinking about something like the CRM tools. I'm a big fan of Salesforce, for example, but I know there's a bunch of them out there.
Yeah.
You think about the behaviors of the sales team of being traditional, let's take my sales briefcase to the field. And that was an old way of doing it. There was likely resistance to that Salesforce tool when it first came out. And now I can't imagine not using it. But the sales team is totally connected. It's very digital. It's a thread that goes through everything. And I'm thinking about that for field service. There's vendors out there that do field service applications like that. And I don't think all the industries, including my own, have really crossed that chasm yet. And I think that's coming. That's one of the next things, is connecting all those field service engineers with, you asked me the question before about inventory, the IoT data. I think you're going to see a convergence of all those data streams. Yeah, which goes back to Sydney was talking about skills. The new field engineer is going to have a whole different set of skills. They have to have competency in the hardware, in the equipment. They also have equal competency in the toolkit.
And I think we can jump into that question, because it's one of the questions I always think is very important to raise, because the human aspect is, always critical in these transformation journeys. And field services, obviously we speak about aging workforce as well, and we speak about the gap, we speak about the lack of some technology knowledge, and also the relationship selling, the engineer being the sort of the face of the organization out in the field. He's the representative. Now we're breaking up those long relationships, digitalizing it. So it's both about re-educating your engineer as well as your customer, right? But then how will the new engineer look like? What skill set are we going to require from them going forward?
Yeah, I'll jump on that first. As you describe all those things, I think about a more connected field engineer. So again, competency with the toolkit, but then having those language skills of using technology and making them smarter at their job. So they used to be subject matter experts because of experience. And now I would say you can supplement that and say they're subject matter experts because they're the fastest ones to collect the data. I think about my kids, for example, like how quickly my 11-year-old daughter can find information on whatever and immediately turn that information into something valuable and that sort of thing. So I think the ability to collect the data, gather the data, synthesize it, and then also give a good recommendation back to the customer. So less touch and feel and more connectedness is the way I would think about it.
And I really love that, Aric. It's so resounding when it comes to what people felt as job security because of knowledge and tenure experience. Really, exactly now is if you take advantage of the technologies, right, you're leveling up the complete workforce. So the folks that are less tenured have that same ability, which gives an uncomfort, right, to the workforce. But the reality is, as a service leader, you need to do that, right? Because you provide that consistency of that technician. And it's, if you don't embrace that technology to level up the game, you're going to be left behind. Absolutely.
Yeah. You get better level of service quality, right, on average, and your experts become more expert. And you also get productivity. As a business owner, you're going to get that productivity. We see a lot of adoption, let's say, in the younger, newer workforces as we're bringing people online in particularly Asia, South Asia. You get that quick adoption for technology and using the tools with no barriers. And then kind of as you move west, it gets a little bit more uncomfortable. But I think that paradigm's changing. I think it's changing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing from speaking to customers alike. And I define it as there's a shift or a paradigm approach in terms of hiring for a will, not necessarily skill, as it relates to the skill of field service, but the will to use and embrace technology to do those things, Aric. And I think it's the blend that both you and Sydney are talking about between the skill set in the workforce as it relates to those that are nearing the end of their careers versus those that are starting. How do you find that blend, and is technology the medium to initiate that knowledge transfer? And then the other element of this is 10 years ago, we in the world went through this huge shift around moving to cloud computing, right? That was that move from on-prem to cloud computing. And it stood up this notion of as a service, and everything became as a service, from analytics to, quite honestly, pizza as a service. But what I envision happening is we could be moving into a new era of workforce as a service. And so core competencies could be handled by a core set of field service engineers. And there could be a periphery of people on the outside that are not necessarily employees, but contracted, that can be pulled in as part of that extended service delivery model. And again, I think the facilitation of technology to knowledge is going to help bridge that. So the faster we get to that, and the easier it becomes in terms of that experience, that could become a reality.
Absolutely.
I like it. I think what that makes me think about is we as business leaders have to be very nimble in our partnerships. You got to be open to partnerships. And again, I think I talked about this, being good at what you're good at, right? Focus on your core competencies. And if you're not good at it, partner for it.
Right. Yeah, the ecosystem is more important now than it ever has been.
And I think you're onto something there, Ali, as well. We've seen the concept of, let's call it crowd service, or the Uberization maybe of service as a concept for quite some time. I haven't really seen it put into place in a tangible business case yet, but I'm really looking forward to the first one who cracks that, because it makes sense, right? if you have a lot of people technicians out on the field a lot, many people are driving a lot of hours in cars, etc. Having the closest technicians to, assigned to the closest job with the right competence, it's kind of a match made. That makes sense. And from even from a sustainability and sort of environmental factor, to having someone at the closest proximity taking that job, that is also, so it's a goodwill into it as well, where you can see if you can, for example, avoid traffic in other aspects. So I'm waiting for someone to do this app or algorithm and crack this for us, so we can sit here in a year from now and actually, it would probably be an Uber out of, coming out of the field service as well.
Right.
But it's a lot about mindsets that you're touching upon, Aric. Also, is the traditional industrial manufacturing industry the most open-minded one? On the other hand, Volvo is doing subscription cars nowadays, so we see things changing all the time. But touching on another aspect, then, is of course, the competitive edge, and this is something we've touched upon back and forth in the sessions today, is actually the fact that running a profitable revenue generating aftermarket field service operation is really, I know, for example, just to take an example off the top of my head, that ABB, I think, has about 80% of their revenue stemming from the actual aftermarket and services of their operation. So it gives kind of an indication of how much money can actually be made after the point of sales, right? To just make it very easy. But then, of course, we need to run it smoothly, efficiently, and all of those aspects, and customers has to be happy. We can't just tie them in boring and long SLAs that they can't get out of. They're pickier than that, and they don't want to be taken hostages and stuck. So, of course, what will be then the competitive edge going forward? Where do you think we will see the differentiation of who wins this sort of aftermarket battle here, or the, who's going to be the winner?
I'll jump in again first. I'd say, sorry, Sydney, I was going to say speed wins for sure. I hear that all the time from customers, especially if something's not working in the field. Yeah. The first person to respond usually wins the order. Not always, but yeah, cycle time is very important. Sorry, Sydney, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Aric. I think in addition to speed, absolutely, it's that consultative relationship that performance of their assets, their equipment. And if you can create services to maximize uptime, to customize such things as planned maintenance, because what's failing and when, and you can customize things like that, and you're showing evidence of improved uptime, and you can sell that consultatively, you build a trust and a commitment from that customer, as opposed to, Lisa, what you said, just selling a contract that they can't get out of. And I think it's not at the point of sale and point of implementation, it's having those touch points to go over that data to show that, yes, I'm monitoring your equipment. Here's what we've done to maximize uptime. And when you create that and paint that story, I think you've really created that trust that they're going to live with you long-term, and you keep the competition out.
I think what both of these gentlemen have outlined is from my perspective, the evolution from a product-driven strategy to a client-centric approach, and putting the client at the core essence of everything you do and why you're important to the world with respect to your business, your product, your service, is going to be the number one differentiator between everybody and their respective competitors in their industry. So moving to a client-centric approach, and then understanding how technology, how process, and how people have to be blended together around that customer to drive additional levels of value. At the end of the day, organizational improvement, it's nobody's specific title in a company or problem. It's all of our problem collectively. And politically, it's a tough battle to fight. But listen, if we can help our customers through that process, through the adoption of a transformation plan and an agenda, then I think that's a strong way to build value and trust in relationships with our customers.
Very interesting. And I think we're about to run out of time, but if you were to sort of pick one highlight, one future trend, or one thing that you would like to sort of bring to the table in terms of where the field service operations or aftermarket operations, if you want to, is going to be in the future, something that you really predict from now on is going to be a main driver, what would you pick?
I'll let the other gentleman agree or disagree, but, I've been in field service for 20 something years, and a topic that doesn't really become predominant. I think will become more predominant is the old OEE, and forgive me for not remembering exactly what it stands for, but you're selling services based off of a agreed upon uptime. And it was a trend for probably a topic for at least 20 years. But I think that's where you're going to see a lot more contracts based on, guaranteeing what type of uptime you can provide for that product. That would be my input towards where I see things going in the future.
Overall equipment effectiveness. Yeah.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah.
The OE, it's easier.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think I'll add to what Sydney said. So I think that's a good point. I think, Lisa, you were almost alluding to the fact like an Uber for field services or something like that. Yeah, I think the dispatching and the work processes are going to change. The tools will come in. I mentioned this before. Technology is going to happen. And then the human side of it, we're going to have to adjust to figure out how to use the tools. Look how fast we adjusted to Uber and Lyft and all these other things. And now it's the way, right? It's the way that we do the work. So I think the way that field services is being done will change. And it'll be changed by the technology.
I would just add on to that there's, we use analytics today for decision management in terms of determining right versus wrong based on patterns and trends. I think what I envision happening is a layer of predictive decision modeling happening in real time on a mobile device as a technician is walking through a workflow, meaning if you turn the wrench left or right, the outcomes are the following, the probability is the following. I think that type of information, that sensory information, contextual information drawn in real time through some sort of device, whether it's a wearable device or it's something that you got on your wrist. I think that ecosystem, that connectiveness is going to enhance and drive to another level, again, with that background decision management aspect. So I think there's some interesting technologies that I've seen emerging around that.
I think I agree with all of you, of course. And I mean, we're touching upon this a lot, but I mean, in my last couple of weeks here, I've had quite a few service events and it all ties down to data. That's one of but it seems like there's still a little bit of a gap from the practitioner point of view of what data to collect and how to use it and actually business model it in the right way, a little bit on the same way that you were touching upon, Ali, between the sort of vision and the actual execution. Because data is great, but if you have no way where to actually put it, then it's not worth that much. So you have to act upon it. And that is something that I think we will see more and more service metrics arising around, especially if we want to move towards the performance-based or outcome-based contracting, which, for example, the defense industry is very good at outcome-based, of course, powered by the hour and all of these concepts. And service industry seems to be a little bit more performance-based, seems to be the new thing. But as we said in your discussion there, Aric, that actually also needs to be KPIs defined, because otherwise what performances are you measuring in terms of outcome, right? And I guess we will see some subscription modeling arising as well. And all of this, again, ties into the interesting points of selling value, which is in itself a whole new webinar that we can spend on. But that is something we see a shift. I mean, and I think you all agree with me there that as soon as we start, looking into the outcome, we all of a sudden have to start presenting things out of the value it creates rather than the actual price or the cost of the investment. So
absolutely.
We will probably meet again discussing other aspects of the service lines here. Thank you so much for joining today. Really appreciated this conversation. And thank you, Sydney, for dialing in last minute all the way from California. I'm sure the, palm trees and everything might have been, you're missing out on something. I'm so jealous. I haven't been able to travel for so long and now it's just winter. And I mean, Ali, you have snow as well, you said. So, I mean, winter is coming, as they said in the Game of Thrones, right? But with that said, thank you yet again. And for anyone who's listening in, even if you watch it on demand or live here, if you have any questions or other thoughts, you can always drop me, Lisa Hellqvist, an email at Copperberg, and I will introduce you to the speakers in a short email in case you have any follow-up questions or anything like that. And also, so I would say for anyone in Europe, have a continued nice evening. And for the rest of you, they're watching from US, I wish you a great day. And thank you guys again for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.